Calling it to order. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, motion to move committee into council into committee of the whole. Marion, you've got it? I know, I did it on purpose. Sort of like the dentist.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Hamley. The council now move into committee of the whole to consider the draft 2020 capital budget.
All in favor? That's carried. So down to 4, introduction. Do you want me to go first? Do you want to go first?
If you had something you want to lead with, that's a good time now.
Yeah, just a couple of things for me. This meeting should be a little more casual than I think most of them. I'm going to be looking down at paper from time to time, so don't be afraid just to shout out if you're trying to get my attention to speak to start off with. If I've learned anything in the umpteen years I've been around here, this is sort of the day that we set the blueprint for the rest of the year. And we come into it with an objective that we're trying to get that number as low as possible today, and then we pay for it for the rest of the year when we can't do anything. So just remember, when you're cutting things today, it means you're not going to be able to do them through the year. So I found over the years that about May or June, I'm going, why can't we do this? And it's, well, it's not in the budget. We don't have the money. So it's got to be kind of a balance there of what you want to achieve as well as what's reasonable for the taxpayer. And those are my comments. So it's all up to you. Do you want to hit your button there, Kate? Thanks.
Pardon me. You're encouraged to ask questions along the way, so we'll have time to talk about every project at every project. A second review of capital will follow the operating budget presentation on December 10th or 11th, depending on how far we get on those days, which we already have allocated. Our agenda is basically to start with this introduction, then I'll go through corporate services. We'll have a quick break. We'll do community services. We have lunch coming around noon, and then after lunch we'll focus on operations. One thing I guess I would highlight as we go through these projects, and it may be in this presentation later, is our purchasing bylaw sets the threshold that once the capital budget is approved, staff can move forward with projects. Anything under $250,000 does not come back to council. So this is really your opportunity to approve, and once they are approved, they are considered approved unless they vary significantly from what is in the budget.
Is that $250,000 number okay? Like, is there any argument against that, or is it an issue at all? Yeah. Is it too high or too low?
I think it's working right now. We are working on a purchasing bylaw update that's going to come forward in January. So at that time, Michelle may look at options for increasing that. I don't think we'd recommend decreasing it, but just to keep up with sort of inflationary and sort of what our total project costs are. But that'll be an opportunity for council to offer input in January when she brings that forward.
Thank you. Carol.
I understand that we are looking at the budget for next year. I have a question around anticipatory budgeting, recognizing that within a year we may be hearing about reductions coming from the provincial government. So as we go forward this year, I just wonder if we need to have a discussion around, should we be thinking of putting more into reserves and the details about what we do, but we're going along assuming, but I'm hearing that there may be concerns coming forward. And do we need to go forward with a different attitude and approach this year?
Good, thank you. Travis?
Thank you, Worship. I would just mention that probably most of those cuts are going to be more effective on our operating side than they would be on the capital side. So that's a great discussion, but I think that's one that can be held until December, if that's okay with you.
If we can have that discussion around operating, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
I think a big chunk of that, Carol, is also going to be probably social services and some of the stuff at the county, which is also going to impact us. Over the last number of years, the county was getting we're getting a reduction of our OMPF grants at the lower tier. And about 2008, if I recall, it was about $2.2 million, and it came down to somewhere around 800,000 or even less, 700,000, with about 250 being cut approximately each year that we were getting at the lower tier. At the upper tier, Grey County, they were getting an upload of social services to the province, which was creating this gap. Meanwhile, they had planned ahead and put money into reserve, not knowing what was going to go on with social services, and had a good chunk of money there. A few years ago, they started to come in with lower tax increases at the county level, which gave us room to move into that. There's only one taxpayer in Grey County. That came to an end, as well as other, programming costs are probably going to go up, social services and things. So where for a few years we were able to rely on the county to come in with sometimes even a negative, right? They gave us money back kind of to spend. That's not in essence. So we probably won't have that in the next few years. We probably will see more of an increase at the county as things get cut, but you're right.
So it's always nice to know in looking at the capital budget what the context is in respect to the overall budget. So while this is something that we are absolutely still working on and subject to change, and in fact it has all changed since this presentation was prepared, the number I think that really is relevant here is sort of in the middle, that total budget increase. And at the time we printed this, our draft budget was sitting around a total levy increase of about 2.7%. With one caveat, that includes an estimate for police services at 3.65, and how I came up with that number is just looking at some comparators of sort of roughly our size municipalities with their own force to come up with what I anticipate. We don't have a draft budget yet from police services, so I'm not sure if that number is accurate or not. So currently, at 2.7, we've got basically a 1% increase dedicated for capital. 2% is our base budget. Those are sort of those cost of living expenses that we can't get away from without changing our staffing or our contracts. And then we'll go through all of these, obviously, at budget time, but you can also see there the impact of the reduction, or the increase in the municipal partnership fund is offsetting what our total increase is by 2%. So basically, with that dedicated 1% to capital, we are at 2.7 in that neighborhood. One thing I would also point out, though, is that not that entire $310,000 is going into this capital budget. Half of that is actually going into the operating budget. Anytime we see somewhere where we're increasing contributions to reserves for future capital, that's been sort of included in that dedicated 1%. So in fact, the actual levy increase dedicated to capital is only going up $150,000 this year.
Question on that spreadsheet there, Kate. Question on that spreadsheet. Last year, we took $202,000 from the capital budget and placed it into a 2020 capital reserve. Is it showing up or provided for information somewhere else outside of that spreadsheet, or where did we locate that $202,000?
Through your worship, so 50,000 of that actually got allocated back into the budget, and that referred to the Enabling Accessibility Grant that we thought we were not going to get at budget time, but then was awarded sort of subsequent. So we were able to say, oh, we do still have our share of that grant project. So that came out of the 250 because that's what built it in the first place. The remaining 150 is still in reserves, and it has not been applied in this capital budget. So if there was any additions to the capital budget, you could potentially use some of those funds.
That's good to know, because it was my interpretation last year that those funds would be allocated and directed for use to this budget to offset the increase to the taxpayer, or the levy ultimately, so.
Through you, your worship, I wouldn't recommend that you decrease the amount of funding that you're putting to capital. In the event that you're not going to utilize all those funds, in order to keep that sort of annual investment stable and ongoing, to maintain any variance in that reserve would be my recommendation. And then when you see what our 5-year forecast looks like, you will see that there are years where we have larger planned investments, in which case that is a good source of funding. Other things that you may consider are the 10th Street Bridge. Currently, we're planning to fund our share of that almost fully by debenture. In order to decrease the debenture payments that are in the operating budget, you may want to apply some of that capital reserve that's built up and reduce your future burden on the operating budget for those payments. So I think there are some strategies for how you could use those funds. I personally would not recommend you use them to decrease what our capital levy is.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, and I remember that from that conversation because I was a big component of making sure we saved that $202,000 for those future big capital projects that we did know that were coming in this 5-year plan. I'd echo what Ms. Allen has stated, that we do know that we're still going to have those things that we have on. I'm not even sure if it was here or not. I can't recall because I've looked at it too many times. We got like the roof needs to be done. We need to have the back parking lot needs to be paved. We've got debenture payments. Any money that I think we can, even when we look at this one, if we find ones that we don't feel or what we exactly want to move forward with, I would once again stress that we take those funds and allocate them into a reserve to help offset future capital costs, whether it's those big ones, right? Like every single time we continue to push a debenture payment down the road, we're still paying ourselves interest on that. And when we look at all of our debentures over the course of when we got its last budget, it was like 20 years, 30 years we're paying into certain things that, we need to become, we're going to go out into the public and preach that we care about the next generation, our future taxpayers, and what they're doing. It doesn't help offset anything by us saying we're going to cut our capital expenditures right now to basically penalize our future ratepayers. So anything we can do, we know that we're in a tight capital situation where we know our infrastructure deficit is continually growing. We need to be, as all leaders of this community, to take on that responsibility of saying we need to find what's a reasonable rate that's going to be applied to our ratepayers while controlling our capital expenses and keeping that our annual capital big projects are manageable.
I just wanted to comment. We had an earlier discussion that was brought forward by Councillor Hamley about principles of budgeting. And I'm wondering, as we go through these days, if we can start to create a list of the principles around how we are approaching budgeting so that we start to have that as a checklist or a screening tool. And Councillor Dodd, that's the first one that in this process we've really discussed. Is that possible to do?
Going into the future, yeah, it won't be today.
No, but just
Yeah.
starting to keep track of the ideas as we move forward.
So again, I highlighted that we're really focusing on this sort of number here today. This is the number that we have control over. And adjusted for growth is also something that is fairly well known. We have the additional room for $200,000 roughly in revenue based on prior year growth, which brings the total impact of what the taxpayer would feel on their municipal levy down to 2.14. This last number, you sort of get away from how solid that is once we start incorporating in the county and education. So that 1.9 relies on a county budget of 2%. That's what it has been historically, but we have no indication that that's necessarily going to be what it is this year. So I wouldn't focus on anything sort of below that total budget increase and growth impact for now. And like I said, it's still subject to change as we finalize our draft budget for you.
Okay, I may have missed it, but police services estimate. The police services estimate, is it unusual not to have their proposed budget at this stage or not?
Not for operating. We're not looking at operating till mid-December, so I'm not sure actually if it may have gone to the board since
I don't even remember.
earlier, I'm not sure.
No.
I thought they had presented it at last board meeting, both capital and operating. However, they said, now we find out the city doesn't need operating yet. So they haven't finalized the operating, but they have started it.
We usually get it at the end of February.
The next slide is one we include every year, and this just sort of brings us from 2013 when we started talking about asset management and what our infrastructure deficit looks like. 2013 was a sort of rough draft of an asset management plan, and it calculated an infrastructure deficit at that time. It recommended a dedicated 1% increase to capital every year in order to close that gap. And what the orange line shows is how much we would be investing every year in capital if we'd maintain that 1% every year. And the gray line shows where we are. Overall, I think it's positive. We are, and especially over the last few years, we are committed to moving in that direction. Since 2013, the province has come up with more regimented guidelines and legislation around asset management. So we're sort of moving through a more formal process now. An update to the actual asset management plan is not required until 2021 and then 2023 with all of our assets in it. So we'll certainly be bringing forward updated asset management plan to council in the future. In the meantime, staff are working hard to accumulate all of the data that goes into an asset management plan. And one thing that our asset management staff person pointed out to me is that plan is kind of a misleading word. It suggests that there's a sort of standalone document that sits in front of you and you can reference all of our assets. And certainly at any point in time, we could generate that for any individual asset. But really, it's an asset management system. It's allowing us to record our costs, it's allowing us to generate reports, and it's allowing us to use that information to build intuitive budgets. So we're developing that over time, and we'll have more for you as the province requires it.
Yep, I just could, and I want to mention, in my opinion, asset management plan. It's great, it's wonderful, we should have been working there, but I think for councils and the public, you may find the gap between where we are, and absolutely we need to keep increasing by 1%. Council may find at a time, your public may say, we can't, again, in spite of all the great work you're doing, in spite of all the growth, we can't afford the tax bill we're getting. And that's when you will say, I believe, you will say, well, you love our services. You love what we give you every day, and they do. I've heard nothing but positives. In fact, as we know, they'd like more. You may find there are some fixed capital assets, when you get down to it, that you can say, we can bring that yellow line down. We may, unfortunately, for some people, say we're not going to replace that asset. And thus your gray line keeps coming up, but maybe your yellow line tapers off. That's always an option for you in the next 50 years. And I think, honestly, that was the whole point, in my opinion, of the province insisting all municipalities have asset management plans, so that we just don't blindly go ahead and replace assets that get very little use, because, well, we've always had them, we're going to have them again. But it will make, at some point, some tough decisions for some councillors to say, we can affect that yellow line just as much as the gray one. And that's the last I'll say on that.
Our current year capital budget proposes total tax base funding of approximately $2.8 million. So this includes the dedicated levy of 2.3, as well as we are still allocating this sort of future debt room to capital until the time comes that we debenture the 10th Street Bridge and the City Hall project. So we have those sort of additional $400,000 right now to use. Once we debenture those projects, that'll fall off of future capital budgets. Just as a reference, the annual capital tax levy requirement proposed by the asset management plan would be $3 million for 2020. So in total, we have approximately $23 million in capital in this year's capital budget. We've got our different funding sources there, including transfers to the capital reserve from the operating budget that bring us up to what our total capital spending in this year from the levy would be $5.4 million. Just to give you some comparators of where we stand with the other municipalities in Grey County, this does not include Chatsworth or Hanover, as they did not respond in time to get it into this presentation. But this just shows what percentage of the total levy is going to capital. This is not an apples-to-apples comparison. Not all of the municipalities in Grey County have the same services that we do in our operating budget, but just to give you an idea. I'll also point out that this only includes the capital budget and contributions to reserves. It doesn't include debt payments or any financing costs.
That's fascinating.
Then that should be Grey County comparators 2019, not 2018. Overall, our capital budget is almost entirely asset management. So the green sections, replacement, rehabilitation, and maintenance, those are all asset management activities, and that's almost 80% of our budget. 17% accounts for new assets, 5% enhancements to existing assets, 1% is putting money into reserves for future capital, and 2% represents studies and plans. As we go through, our projects are prioritized based on the A, B, C, D, very high, high, moderate, and low. There's numerous items that we look at when we evaluate a project in order to determine how it falls within this, and it allows us to be somewhat consistent as to how we prioritize projects across all divisions, because obviously there's different divisions serve different services and groups, so it's difficult at times to prioritize them on a consistent basis. This is a guideline. You may ask, why is something moderate when for your own strategic priorities it's a high, or vice versa, and that would be because it's not sort of captured in the matrix. So it's certainly a guideline, but it's not necessarily reflective of council's opinion. So based on that, again, almost all of our budget is prioritized as very high or high. I think there's one project in the entire package that is low and a few moderates. And then we've got our investment by service area. All of our projects are benefiting the city of Owen Sound, so breaking them down by service area may or may not be useful information to you. One thing I will point out is the 10th Street Bridge I've shown on its own. 33% of our total capital program of that 23 million is the 10th Street Bridge. That's an anomaly. We won't have that in future years, so you could sort of take that 10 million out of the budget, and we're still in that $13 million range for an annual capital program. That's fairly stable with where we've been in previous years. And then capital funding by source. I might address Councillor Merton's comment here about utilizing grants. The only grants applied in the capital budget are known grants. So our federal gas tax is utilized, and any grants that have been applied for and approved. One program, the OCIF formula program, we are ensured that we'll get our 2020 allotment of just over $1 million. However, because we don't know the future of that program, those funds have not been applied in this year's budget. They will be held in reserve, and once we know the future of that program, we may look at using them sparingly for a specific project. Historically, we had planned to use those ongoing funds for the Downtown River Precinct phases that are expected to go on for the next decade, but not knowing what the future of that program is, we're just going to hold those funds for now.
Kate, how does this pie diagram compare to other municipalities, would you say? Similar in terms of how it's weighted?
I can't answer that question. I'm not sure. I could
Is there any, yeah, go ahead.
certainly look at some of our comparators.
They would all be unique, Councillor.
The thing about capital is it varies year over year. Even our own capital budget varies significantly year over year. So one year we might have a huge grant, as we do this year for the 10th Street Bridge. Next year we won't. So one year we might be debenturing a large project. Next year we won't. So not only would it vary for our own pie chart, but I agree, it would vary greatly across all municipalities. The current budget includes 2 debentures, the first being the 10th Street Bridge with an estimated annual payment of $600,000. We planned for this. We have that debenture room, and we're holding on to it until our estimated 2023 when that debenture is issued. Anything we can do to reduce that $5 million down will decrease the debenture burden. So, for example, if we have some surplus gas tax, we could allocate it to this project. That OCIF funding that we're holding for now could potentially be allocated to this project, or your unspent capital reserve could be allocated to this project. And that would free up two things. You could free up some debenture room for perhaps another large project that's in the horizon, or potentially reduce our payments altogether. And then the other item there is the SPS upgrade. That's a wastewater project, and it is to be anticipated to be paid through wastewater rates. I believe we're aware of the green fund that's coming forward, and this may be the project that we look at to apply for under that fund. Council would have an opportunity to add input there, in which case we won't have that debenture payment. It would be paid for by a grant.
Kate, can I just ask, are we still self-debenturing?
No, these projects would be debentured externally.
Is our self-debenturing all used up?
At this point in time, it is mostly used up. We're still financing the Julie MacArthur Regional Rec Center that way, as well as we finance all of our sort of capital that's construction financing. We do all of that with our own debenture. There may be opportunities, and as these things mature, to look and see, does it make more sense to debenture this against ourselves? Do we have that room? What's happening with the investment? Can we earn more over the long term? Those sorts of things. But we do still have that fund, and it is fully utilized right now. I've included for your reference just the balances of our capital reserves. Anything that these are sort of the 2019 balances, the balances that are available. So we'll see as we go through the detail sheets any time reserves have been applied. But this may be something that we can refer back to throughout our presentation if you're thinking, oh, could we use a reserve for this? Or if there's anything additional that you may see that a reserve could be utilized for, we can come back here.
Could we get a printout of that?
Sure. Brianne, are you able to get someone to print those 2 pages? They're in my presentation. The goals again for today's meeting, present and discuss.
Sorry, I had actually a couple questions then before you
Okay.
jump through the last page on that. Under the library roof, there's an interest accumulation of $110,000, bringing up the 2019 budget to $147. We started at $72,900. We budgeted in some, we budgeted out. I presume that's the retaining wall?
That's a good catch. That $110,000 should be our budgeted use of that fund, because we did do the roof. It should not be in that column.
Okay.
It is in a negative position, and we have to recontribute to that to catch up. And that was a decision that we made in order to do the project, even though we didn't have the funds. We'd sort of overspend that and then
That's a reserve
recoup it.
contributions through the, starting
Exactly.
again this year.
You'll recoup
but
those
that
costs, and
line
you'll see them in
is
the
wrong there.
actual library budget, that we're contributing $36,000 a year in order to catch that budget back up.
Also, I've got a couple questions then. The City Hall facility, are we going to get a completion report at some point here now? We've been moved in for 13 months.
I will say we're still working on finalizing our arrangements with the contractor, and I'll leave it at that. Still anticipating fully that we will come in on or under budget on that project, but I can't give you the exact number until probably January, I'm going to hope.
Okay, and then also just to elaborate a bit more, we started with a facility booking at 51.5. We've budgeted in 40. We've got an interest accumulation column amount again of 92. Is there plans for that reserve, or are we just building, or what's some of the background to the facility booking there and the interest accumulation?
Sorry, I think in the water and the facility booking, that's an oversight. Those two should also be in the total balance column. So that 92,000 is actually the balance of that reserve, not something got mixed
Not
up there.
quite as strong
But
as it
basically,
looks.
yeah, we've got the annual contribution going in there. We've budgeted to spend a little bit of it this year.
Okay.
And what that is for, those funds are raised from the facility booking revenues for the Bay Shore, the rec center, and some of our sports fields. We use those funds then to invest back in those facilities. And sometimes things come up throughout the year, but generally they're addressed at budget time if we plan to use that reserve.
Okay, thanks.
So we're going to present and discuss the details for each proposed capital project. Please ask questions and make decisions as we go. So if you want to make motions as we present each project, I think that's the best format to do so. Although a draft tax levy increase has been provided to council for context, we're not aiming to discuss that budget until December the 10th. We'll revisit the capital budget upon completion of the operating budget on December 11th. And once budgets are approved, we're aiming for that final public budget meeting to occur on January 27th. All capital projects under $250,000 will proceed without subsequent council approval, so long as they are within budget and the scope of the project remains what was presented to you today. Tender or RFP contracts over $250 always come back to council for approval before they are executed. And any projects that are not budgeted or come in over budget must also be approved by council throughout the year. So I'll start with this spreadsheet. It's very small. However, it's just sort of an overall summary of what our capital program looks like. Each division is down the left-hand side here. We've got your 5-year capital plans summarized in the next 5 columns. Our current year recommended capital is there in green, and then how we're funding that capital shows up in the following columns. So at the very bottom is where you see that $23 million, roughly $22,851. And as you can see in the next, sort of in that 5-year, our future capital requirements are closer to the $14 to $16 million range when we're not doing a project like the 10th Street Bridge. This is the same chart that was in the actual introduction as well as the reserves. The capital summary? Yeah, I've updated this to reflect a couple staff recommendations. We'll see those as we go through. I think you probably have the version I sent out on Friday that was just a capital. It wasn't the version that was published in the agenda. I will say, too, just right now, if we were to approve the capital program as it's presented to you today, we would be sort of oversubscribed by $17,500. Not a significant amount of money, but just to let you know, that full capital levy that we've allocated in the operating budget is fully applied here, and it's actually slightly over. All right, so I'm going to present the capital detail sheets for IT and corporate services as well as fire. However, I have Sean here, so if you have any specific questions as they relate to the projects, I believe I'll almost always defer to him. And then certainly for fire, Kristen's probably our expert for those facility-related investments. The first item is you'll see this annually in our capital budget, replacement computers. This would allow us to purchase approximately 12 desktops, laptops, and tablets, depending on what format the staff are using. They generally last 4 to 5 years, and then we need to be replaced. We do our best to move machines through the organization. So if there's a high-level machine that still has life on it, but maybe not is maybe not suitable for that high-level user, that machine can be passed down rather than recycled at that time. So we do our best to optimize all of our computers, but the lifespan of a computer, as I'm sure you're all aware, is not much more than 5 years. We're not, yeah, I think we...
Sorry, Kate. Just before you get too started, and just to make sure I'm not missing something, do we have a 5-year forecast on some of our capital projects? Do we have that spreadsheet like we normally get?
Yes, in this presentation, at the end of the entire document, we'll get into those 5-year forecasts, and that's also when we're going to have an opportunity to talk about those forecasts as they relate to development charges. So at first, we're just going to go through the current year recommended projects, but before this day is over, we will talk about those 5-year plans and look at anything that's sort of on the horizon in each of these departments.
Okay, Brianna, would you mind printing that off for me before, when we take the break? I find that very useful for when we're making decisions about this year is when we can have a composite.
I can print that at our break, Brianna.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe before we get there, we did notice as we were going through staff, there's a bit of confusion around what is our 5-year program and when you have these projects that span multiple years. I think in future, as we go through these detail sheets, we'll focus only on those projects which are either brand new or they were approved in a last budget, but they have not been started. And we'll remove those projects that are frankly just moving along as planned, but we always anticipated that they would span over year end, because certainly our year continues. We don't just stop at the end of our fiscal year. So those will be in here. We'll highlight them when they're there, but in the event that it's moving on as intended, or if the project hasn't started, I'll leave it up to staff to identify that.
Could I also ask for the previous screen, the totals, to get a print of that since the numbers have changed?
For the
Not-
reserves?
Not that one, the one before.
Oh, the capital summary?
Yeah,
Yeah,
since
I'll
those
print.
numbers have changed, could we get the update of that? Thanks.
The next item is replacement monitors. Again,
The
this
one
is
in
an
here's wrong, too.
This is an annual cost, and this would allow us to replace approximately 20 monitors at a size of 24 inches. They're not on a replacement cycle, and many of our monitors are old and small in size, and we're sort of reactive to replacing monitors. As people need them, we go and get them. We don't sort of anticipate or have a schedule to say this monitor is set to be replaced. Many staff are requesting 2 monitors to expand their desktop viewing. I can say I use more than 1 monitor. I find it saves me a significant amount of time and mostly paper, because I can compare one document to another without having to print it out and then doing it that way. So I certainly appreciate having that ability. Replacement cell phones. We have approximately 65 cell phones that are city-provided phones, and this budget is to replace them as needed based on the term of the plans that we have. Printers. Small printers wear out over time, and it's cheaper to replace them rather than get them fixed. A new printer is required at the visitor center, as well as mobile printers are required for building and campground to allow for printing on site.
Not that it's budget related. What do we do with those old printers? Do we donate them to someone?
Usually when they're done, we recycle them.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Replacement telephones. In your, sorry. In your 5-year plan, you do see there is sort of a future project that looks at our entire phone system. This, however, is to replace actual hardware phones that are not currently working. So this will allow us to purchase approximately 10 phones. It'll also allow us to purchase 2 new voice conference phones for the 2 meeting rooms out in these atriums, similar to the one that we utilize in the basement. And that allows us to have those sort of networking meetings with people off-site.
I recognize it's only $5,000, but that's like $500 a phone. Like, am I not crazy on that, or?
Well, they're small altogether. Yeah, so that includes the 2 bat phones, which are about $750 each, so that makes up about $1,500. And the phones are not your regular phones, they're voice over IP phones. So they're basically internet phones, so they're network phones, and that's how much they cost. The system itself is 10 years old, so after 10 years, the phones are starting to wear out. We're out of spares, like we have none left. So this is to basically replenish. Phone system itself, to replace the entire system, is about $100,000. So by doing this, this will extend the life of it. Plus, we'll also be updating the software so that it'll extend the life, so we won't have that large expense.
Microsoft Office. This is to upgrade all city staff to Office 2019. Most users are currently running Office 2016, and Microsoft Office, is upgraded every 3 years, and the cost of that is $80,000. We have a lot of users. Utilocate software. One thing we've worked towards doing in both capital and operating is presenting all of our hardware and software capital, as well as in operating all of those licensing fees in the IT budget. However, this is specific to utilities, and so it would be funded through the water rates. And as you can see, it's used to locate. It's basically location software that we can use on site. This is Active Collab software, $1,500. It's project management software. The planning department has requested this software to manage projects within their team, and it would be an annual cost after this first year. Electronics management application. So this would be, I would think, one of those first projects that they have been approved. They're moving along as scheduled. It's included here because we will be paying for it in 2020. However, this just summarizes the decision that council made on Monday night. Replacement firewalls, $4,000 to replace 2 firewalls at the Bayshore and Art Gallery, and they need to be replaced approximately every 5 years. I expect everyone knows exactly what a firewall does, and no one will want to ask me that question. The Art Gallery phone system is for $8,000. This will bring the Art Gallery onto the city's phone system, which will over time save us money in phones and staff time used to maintain a system that they have, which apparently we don't have any sort of vendor on file for. Replacement UPS, $7,000. They need to be replaced every 5 years due to life expectancy and to maintain battery life.
I know that some of these are like, they always repeat every year, and I know they're replacements and we do them systematically, but how many of these UPSs or host servers or anything else do we currently have in our corporation?
UPSs, so anytime there's a server, we have larger UPSs. The smaller ones generally come out of operating because they're not too expensive.
Sorry.
Where's that button?
So the large ones are anywhere we have a server. So wastewater, water, City Hall, the rec center all have large UPSs, and each spot has 2 UPSs. In case one goes down, the other one covers it up. So this one, what this line item is to replace one of them at one of those locations so that we're always current, because the batteries only last 5 years. Okay?
I just, every one of these that we're going through are all rated C moderate. It almost seems like, well, it's kind of middle of the park.
I can comment on that, and I think that looking at our actual matrix that we use to evaluate these, I would say it's very external service centric. It's based on our strategic plan, and a lot of the sort of internal strategic items aren't necessarily identified in our strategic plan, so it doesn't score highly on those sections.
The reason I'm asking is, like, we're going to get into some other stuff that is going to be high and very high, and trying to make some tough decisions, and then thinking back, we're going through a whole row of stuff here that's just C moderate. It's almost makes you want to go back and start looking at the moderates.
Yeah, if asset management were our only criteria, these would all be very high. They're all at the end of their useful life. The risk of failure and the consequence of failure is very high. But we look at other things in those priority matrices, including, do we have a grant to help fund them? Is it identified in our strategic plan, and those sorts of things? So it's sort of, I do see how it kind of misses the boat on some of these internal investments that don't necessarily get identified in that prioritization matrix. So certainly on an asset management point of view, these are very high. In the context of all of these projects, they seem to score at a moderate, if that makes sense.
I think Richard and Travis both have.
Yeah, I'd say in this department, certainly, Councillor O'Leary, you only need to lose one hard drive to realize you should have replaced it when the need was moderate, not waiting till it was high. And I think with all digital infrastructure, we've got to take that sort of approach. You don't wait till it hits the end of its life to start thinking about replacing it, because the results could be catastrophic. So you try to sort of think ahead a couple of years and get this stuff looked after while it's still functioning as it should.
Kate, we seem to take a lot of things out of water rates. Can you tell me how we justify that to be out of water rates?
That you're looking at?
Replacement host server.
Well, the host server serves our water service. All of our water data, all of our water customers, all of that information is housed on our host server. That would actually be split water and wastewater rates in actuality. And what we do in sort of some of those broad projects that benefit all departments, the ratio that I utilize is sort of 1/6 is water, 1/6 is wastewater, and then 2/3 of it is for the general city. That's the formula that we use, unless it can be specifically attributed. So for example, with the replacement computers, that would be allocated to water on a basis of where is that computer going? Is it going to a water employee or a city employee, in which case we fund it that way.
Thanks. It was more a question of information for others to know that we do justify what comes from the water rates. Thanks.
Carol, I think, had a question next.
Because we rely on the priority moderates high, is there a chance that the matrix could be looked at and modified as a tool to include the risk, the impact for the risk? Because I think the comments are valid around the importance of IT service. But it sounds like it's the tool modification to provide us more information that would be helpful.
Certainly, I'll send what an example matrix looks like, and maybe we can commit to sometime in early 2020 actually sitting down with a report probably to corporate services on how that matrix is built, and if there's any sort of prioritization that council would like to see, or different weights on different areas. Right now, all of the columns are weighted the same. We have 5 host servers, I believe. Currently, their system is in place to replace 1 host server on a yearly basis in order to keep the equipment current and spread the cost out. Hosts are under warranty for 5 years, and they need to be replaced once this warranty period is up. So those major host servers are $20,000 a piece. Replacement storage. This is to replace a storage device. They need, again, to be replaced every 5 years, and this storage device is located at the rec center. It is used for storage of off-site backups in the event of that our primary backups are corrupted. So this is really that hot site storage that we hold off-site. It is a bit of an insurance expense, but in the event that we were to ever lose our data, cybersecurity attack on our existing data, anything like that, that's when this will become invaluable to the municipality. Switches for $20,000. This was the replacement of 4 core network switches. They need to be replaced every 5 years. And we have also spread this cost out rather than doing it all at once in order to keep it stable over time. And then this one is our sort of main servers, storage servers. There are 2 of them. This wasn't in our first draft of the budget as we went through with staff. However, in looking at our 5-year capital, we identified that we have this requirement to replace those servers next year. So rather than take the full brunt of that cost next year, I'm recommending we put $60,000 into reserves this year to have available for next year. One thing that is a positive is approving the records management system. I think we will see over time our need for storage be reduced. And if not our current need for storage being reduced, our future need for storage will not increase as much as it would without it. So I think we'll see these costs be managed over the long run as a result of that, as we're not housing redundant data and things that we can otherwise be getting rid of. Downtown Wi-Fi, this project was brought forward to Corporate Services Committee at our last meeting. It is more of a strategic priority rather than an asset management priority.
All right.
I think everyone has read through what was presented, so I won't go through the details of this today.
So this one, it'd be interesting to have a conversation with council on. When we brought this up at Corporate Services, I do think downtown Wi-Fi is an essential service that can be utilized, but I think there's more to it besides just doing Wi-Fi in the downtown core. I think we need to kind of come up with, it can be used as an economic development driver, it can be utilized as a tourism thing. And I just think we have opportunities that I don't think we're prepared for this year to use that downtown Wi-Fi for. I think the long-term plan, we should be trying to think of things that we came to ECDEV back in the day were about how to utilize smart technology, about doing things. If you're using your downtown Wi-Fi systems, how does it connect into making other portions of your community smart? And that was one of the things that we ran through originally, was potentially you get this downtown Wi-Fi going, and then we had to plan to run some test projects through the DRP when that was going, to see how things could utilize about embracing technology for the future, whether that was to see, our garbage bins full, LED lights changing when they're actually in use, when people are walking through them or not. I think for me, I would ask that this one, I would vote to remove it from this budget. But my question, the reason I'm saying that is because I'd like to see if council has a long-term strategy behind it. I do believe that the downtown Wi-Fi is, I think it's an added bonus. Is it utilized by everyone that we wanted to do? Maybe not yet, but do we do a proper marketing campaign to it? Is it good service? Those should be longer-term questions. And the real longer-term question is, what's our end goal and what's our end strategy for Wi-Fi? Is it just to put Wi-Fi up there? Is $40,000 is that good just to put Wi-Fi out there? Or if we're going to spend $40,000, should we have an end strategic goal of how to utilize that and maximize that asset?
So is that a motion on the floor then?
Yes.
To pull it out? And just to pull it out, period, or are you talking about reserve, or what do you?
I'm not sure how the rest of council would feel, but I would say that anything that we do vote not to put into this capital budget, or anything we vote against, maybe we just hold into a side pool until the end of the term and decide what we're going to do with it.
No position on that just yet. I notice there's a whole bunch of hands, so I'll go from one end to the other, I think. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, my comment was on something else, but now that we've got a motion on the floor, I'll just speak to it and then maybe will or will not come back to the other comment. I guess that my comment on the motion would be, it's an interesting one. I'm not going to support it because I think that free and open Wi-Fi in a community is an expectation of people who come here to visit us. And we've put a lot of time and energy as a city into attracting, and here's Wayne's favorite word, the millenniapreneurs to our community. And we are trying to boost our profile with the younger demographic. And I think the younger demographic has an expectation that when they visit a community, they're going to have access to all of the stuff they have access to everywhere else. So I'm not going to support the motion at this point.
Scott, did you have your hand up?
Not yet.
No? Okay. Carol?
I would like clarification on what we mean by downtown. Based on our zoning, downtown is actually not just downtown core. There is a specific zone that's deemed downtown, like commercial. So if this is a project that has several phases, a trial, and then it's to expand, then I think we need to have all of that information to make a decision, because it may not be just a one-time 40,000 to help us make an informed decision.
Through your worship, I'll send that report out that went to corporate services, as I do believe it had a map of exactly what the area covered by this investment would be. And then future investments of the same size and scope would sort of incrementally be added onto that. But we can send that out.
Okay, coming through. Brian?
So we had this discussion at the DIA meeting the other night, and one of the concerns was why just Main Street and not all of our downtown? And Sean was asked the question, what it would cost to do all of the downtown, and you pretty much doubled it, so it's be like 80,000. So if the motion is to table it, so to speak, like I still want to do it, I just want to do it right. So if, there's no use doing Main Street if we're going to expand later. I just think there's other things to consider. Inspector Flooney mentioned that, the timing of the Wi-Fi, like should we shut it down like we do at the information center, because, you get hangouts, but if it's all of downtown, anyway, I just think there's more to it, and if we're going to do it, we should do it right.
Who's next? John? Go ahead.
I'll be supporting the motion. I said to Sean, I think it's a nice thing to have. I think, given the 10th Street Bridge and other things we're dealing with, I think the nice to have should be parked a while.
Thank you, Worship. I too will be supporting the motion. We do have some access points downtown currently, is that correct?
Just in City Hall.
So there's no access at the library or?
Library,
Okay, so
the rec center, the Bay Shore.
Right.
But as far as downtown goes,
on the main street?
That's correct.
So, but it doesn't encompass the whole DIA area?
No.
And there were certainly concerns that DIA expressed. I'd like to see it removed from this year, but yet in next year's plan, and hopefully we can develop a marketing strategy or something to use towards justifying this amount of money right now.
Brock, anything? Go ahead.
I just think of the value of having specifically the postal code aspect of this. So the way it works is when people come downtown and they use the Wi-Fi, they would be required to enter their postal code. I mean, Grey County, their tourism department has spent how many thousands of dollars trying to figure out these postal codes and where people come from. And we have a tool to capture that right now. And I think that's hugely important for the downtown.
Thanks. I will be supporting the motion. There's too many examples which we can quickly glean, such as the tents that were cast in the Queen's Park this summer, which caused tremendous stress and grief to some of the staff in the city dealing with these people, and some of the encampment was the availability of free Wi-Fi. We've invested heavily in the river precinct, which we want to maintain a strong positive image. And part of the concern by many people is how will we enforce or not condone a higher presence of loitering and negative presence, which we see a lot of in the area of Tim Hortons. There's a lot of harassment around the banks. I was harassed twice for money just last week. One's outside my bank, one inside the atrium. The banks won't tell you privately or publicly, but they'll make a stance by finally moving out of your downtown like one did a year and a half ago. So I can look at a couple, and I understand the idea here of looking at a long-term plan, and that's something that should come through a committee, because quickly Cambridge invested $10,000 in a startup on a similar project for downtown Wi-Fi around their city hall. It's $1,750 a year cost. Waterloo, which is one of the most connected cities in North America, and perhaps the world, has a $6,600 annual cost, but they do not have such an elaborate downtown covering area. Kitchener's quickly catching up. What Kitchener has, you take a quick Google, is a quick website that tells you 51,000 different spots that you can locate free Wi-Fi, but it's not subsidized by the general taxpayer to provide that service for downtown. And I feel this just $40,000 expenditure is just the taxpayer subsidizing free downtown Wi-Fi. Myself as a business owner, it's not proven to me yet the value in developing more businesses downtown off of this. So I'll be supporting the motion.
Before we go on to a second round, Sean, is this scalable? If we put this in and went ahead with this this year based on what's proposed, and does that limit our ability to expand it in the future? Does it limit our ability to put together some of the plans and some of those other things that could be played off of the Wi-Fi that Travis is talking about?
It's fully scalable. So this is just sort of getting it in the main core, get it up and running, and then it's expandable. So the system we're looking at putting in is totally expandable throughout the entire downtown core.
So we could expand the geography, and we could add different features and services to it.
That is correct.
Okay, good. Richard, I think, had his hand up first, and then I'll go back to Travis after that.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Councillor Gregg touched on the issue that I thought was separate from this motion, so I'm going to comment now on it. I did have a conversation with our Director of IT Services, and when this system is put in, it is possible to determine the hours during which it's open, so it could be closed down from 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. quite easily, though I think, Sean, your comment was it's easier to do it right at the start rather than try to add it in later. So if we decide to proceed with this, I would certainly be bringing a subsequent motion that we consider the hours that the free Wi-Fi is up and available on Owen Sound.
And I'll go back to the mover to wrap it up.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess one of the things, and I'll agree, I do believe that downtown Wi-Fi could be beneficial for users. I think you're right, Councillor Hamley, that collecting those postal codes is useful for data collection. One of the things when we had that discussion at corporate services and individuals outside of that after seeing that report come through were that if you're going to offer a service, it needs to be reliable and consistent or people will fail to use it. If it's only good for the downtown core, but I'm sitting on 3rd Avenue East and don't have access to it, I'm probably not going to use it. When it doesn't automatically sign in. You're going to have to be on downtown in the prescribed area, log into it, put your postal code. It's going to be good until you're in that service level. You walk to Tim Hortons or you walk to 1st Avenue outside of that limit, it will be shut off. So the thing is, when you talk to individuals, it's about, if we're going to do this, I think we should be having the proper amount of budget into it for both. That's going to do the entire, encompass the entire area, or we're having a plan between council to have a look at what our end goal is for Wi-Fi in the downtown community. Do we believe downtown Wi-Fi, there's multiple issues. Do we believe downtown Wi-Fi is essential service for tourism and economic development? Yes or no? Yes or no? Go from the next stage to say, what do we have our long-term goal of using that service? How are we going to maximize it besides just collecting postal codes? Because in 5 years after we collect enough postal codes of knowing where people are coming from so we can get a report, that's great, but that's only a one-end piece of data. What's our next step from that? And for me, our next step data as a council, are we ready or prepared to do the extra budgeting, the extra costs of doing a whole, is it a smart community? Is it just a downtown Wi-Fi service that we're providing? Where are we going with this? And yes, it is serviceable, but when we're 2 years in, 3 years later on yes, this is a $40,000 project, what happens next year when we say, things are tough and we're not paying the $40,000 for it and we're stuck here, and in 10 years, those assets are dropping just like they did previously. We either need to be fully into this or we're not into this. And I think $40,000 isn't fully into it, and that's why I would remove it until we would come back with a proper strategic plan of what we're doing with it. So, confirm my motion. I would advise to remove it just from the 2020 budget.
Okay, so there's the motion. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? 1, So, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so that was about 2 opposed, I guess, so it's carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I think similar to what we did last year, any projects that are deferred or removed, I'll summarize at the end of this meeting, and we can decide how either those funds are reallocated or set aside. Fiber and roads, this is generally an annual cost that we have when we dig up roads for other projects, generally for reconstruction or water or wastewater. There may be an opportunity to lay our own fiber. The more of our own fiber we have, the less we have to, expensive fiber we have to rent in order to connect our city facilities.
This one here, could it be explained where this $50,000 is being spent? Because there's $200,000 also in the water wastewater budget for fiber, which I think is a considerable investment. How close are we also to being completed to the point where we start to, where we see the savings, not keep seeing the word start with this budget card?
Okay, so right now, this year's main project has been Harrison Park, so getting fiber into the park. We had conduit put in when the road went in. We had conduit put in as part of the electrical. They actually put the fiber in the tube yesterday, and today they're finishing up. So what that'll allow us to do is to get faster internet into the shop so that they can start doing their work orders, and certainly at a more effective rate. So I'll give you an example. Right now they have a speed of 2 megabits. The new service will be 150. So the connection back to the city network will be dramatic. So that's this year's main project. Next year we want to get over to the transit terminal from City Hall. What we're trying to do is work towards connecting all city buildings. So right now we have 3 buildings that lease fiber at a cost of approximately $40,000 a year. The idea is to get off that leased fiber. So what we're trying to do is get our own fiber in the ground to connect these buildings together to make it one big network, because everybody, especially with records management, everybody's going to need the high-speed internet to get to their files. Right now it's a challenge for some of them because of the speed that they're connecting back to the City Hall. That's where the main servers are.
I think the councillor has a good question, and Sean, at the pace we're going, when will we see that the cost come down, roughly?
I'm looking at, we have 3 years left on our Rogers contract, so I'm
3
looking
years.
at approximately 3 years.
So still, where's the $200,000 being spent to put fiber in the water and wastewater?
So that's going up 8th Street to get to the East Hill Pump Station, and also along that corridor is a lot of water chambers. So the plan is to get fiber into those water chambers to monitor those systems so that we don't have an incident where we lose pressure in one of those chambers and have to wait till it shows up at somebody's doorstep to say that the pressure's gone down. This way it'll be connected back to the main SCADA system and be able to catch it ahead of time. That $200,000 was a quote that we got, a budgetary quote. I can't say for sure, but I expect it to come in cheaper, but that was the quote we received from the contractor to put that in.
Okay, so we're not expending $40,000 a year for service, for leasing fiber for the transit terminal, right?
For the transit terminal?
So we're looking at an allocation of $50,000 to provide fiber to the transit terminal to offset what kind of an operational cost do we have right there now for leasing fiber? Because it sounds like you just said that we lease fiber for the transit terminal, and this is part of an attempt to remove that need for leasing over time. But is that leasing cost, is it $1,200 a year that we pay?
So for the transit terminal, it's currently running on DSL, which runs at a speed of about 4 megabits. So, and there's no other options to get it in there. The other part to the transit terminal is that building is spring-fed. So we're planning to put a water monitor on the spring-fed service so that once again we can feed that back into the water treatment plant to monitor the system to make sure the pressure is there for everybody down in that area. So it's twofold. It's one, to get the transit terminal connected back to the city network, but it's also to monitor the water pressure at that location.
Okay, because that raised another question. This was all being funded by taxation. There's no mention of water rates funding any part of this, so.
We could.
I'd just like to hear from others then, further on. What's 250,000, I think, this year.
Well, if we go with the principle of if it's affiliated with water and it's 1:6 ratio, then we would be consistent in applying that principle. And so I would suggest that we do that.
I don't see anyone else's hand up. So keep moving. Is this our fifth report? When I see 20A50, does that mean this is our fifth report we've got to? I'm not counting, but.
Those are identifiers, but it is the last report.
Okay.
So for clarification, on this fiber, we are using some of it's going to be allocated to the water rate, so it won't be for total $50,000 to taxation?
No, I'll do the sort of similar proportional benefit to water for that if it's
Thank you.
going to improve the spring fed. I'll have to talk to Sean exactly how those costs.
Sorry, I was just confused. I thought we were putting 200 from water into fiber, and this is 50 for a total of 250.
That's correct. So the 200 was actually, I believe, a project that was approved last year to do the fiber up to the East Hill Booster Station.
Yeah.
We did not complete that project.
Oh, you're
We
on.
didn't start that project in 2019. We were concerned with the 10th Street Bridge and the traffic rerouting. We sort of wanted to let that settle before we dug anything up in that area. So we've held off on that project, but it is being carried forward.
So my question is this the taxation portion of that, or are you going to break down this 50,000 to apply some of this 50 to water?
We can apply some of this 50 to water in addition to that fully water-funded project that is solely for the benefit of the SCADA system.
Okay, I thought combined that they were already sorted out. Good, thank you.
Just a point of clarification. There was a lot of, or several weeks last spring where there was a lot of ongoing work on 8th Street, and I was under the presumption that was the expenditure of the allocation for fiber that was being done. They were boring and burying line all along from 9th Avenue there.
So that was Rogers. Rogers was putting in conduit in the ground. I was able to partner with Rogers to get our conduit in the ground. So actually we did start the project last year to get the top of the hill done. But like Kate said, right now we're sitting at the bottom of 8th Street Hill. And with all the traffic changes and everything, we really didn't want to interrupt that until that's all settled. So.
I think we'll get through, there's only a few more projects here that sort of fall under that corporate services, and then we'll take a quick break. We can get some of those things printed for you, and then we'll come back. So the next project here is our asset management, asset and risk management. The one item here, asset management plan for non-core assets. This was originally identified in our 2019 capital budget. It's not required by the province to be complete until 2021. We're recommending at this time, actually, since this was published, that we either defer these funds or reallocate them for now and look for bringing that forward in the 2021 budget when we have a better idea of how exactly this money will be spent, whether it's on third-party specialists that understand those non-core assets. And that would really include facilities and parks and cemetery, just for a broad heading on what those assets are. So I'm going to add this to the list of funds that will be made available in 2020 and look for bringing that forward in a future year. Unless council has...
Do you need a motion now to do that? To defer it to 2021?
That would be my recommendation.
I'll do that motion.
Good, Marion's moved it. Any further discussion?
Yeah, and I think Kate answered much of my question, because I had the note here, this sounds like like we have Kim Davenport, so to me this sounds like an allocation of operational staff. So why is it being interpreted as capital?
We certainly have Kim's expertise in order to put this all together to make sure we're meeting what the legislative requirement is and managing the data. doing the analysis for those non-core assets, especially facilities, when we start looking at electrical systems and facility conditions. Kim doesn't necessarily have that expertise, and so we may need to bring in some industry specialists in order to grab some of the data that we're looking for. But like I said, I think that's where we weren't exactly sure exactly how this was going to be spent, which is why we recommend moving it forward.
Okay, so call the question. That all in favor? That's carried.
The next one is sort of, these are general expenses. They benefit the city as a whole. They're not allocated to any specific department, but the first one is our strategic plan. So our last strategic plan was completed in 2015, and it was basically a 5-year outlook. It was until 2020, and that was completed on the previous term of council. We recognize that this current term of council may want to do an update to that plan or a new plan, and this $40,000 would be in order to hire a consultant to guide us through that process. As I note in the verbiage here, staff will be heavily involved in the development and execution of the plan so that everyone feels that they know it and that we're working with it. The $40,000 is funded through a reserve, so we have been putting money aside in the operating budget towards the anticipated investment of $10,000 a year, as well as I believe the other half falls within the scope of the modernization grant that we're holding in reserves. So it recommends taking $20,000 from that grant as well. So none of this falls sort of on the tax levy funding for capital, and certainly the timing may be flexible depending on what council's desire is.
Right?
If we've already got a strategic plan and all you're doing is adding to it, what's a consultant doing?
I think, aren't we keeping our options open here, that we can make that decision? We haven't really had the decision as a discussion as a council. That would come at some point, how far we want to go, how big we want to go, what we want to do, how we want to look at it. This is keeping our option open. And again, not coming from taxation.
I haven't been deeply involved in many strategic plans, but I do think from those that I have been involved in, I've recognized the benefit of having an expert come just to guide us through the process and help us understand what are the questions that we want to ask ourselves. Certainly, staff is very busy gathering data, understanding what sort of those performance measurements that we can provide and things like that. But those experts really are good at keeping us on track, I find.
Wayne, do you recall the cost last time?
It was all of that, Your Worship.
My
recommendation would be for staff to be involved in your plan along with council and the public.
Of course.
It's difficult for them to also run the plan. But I also suggest your plan is solid. I think you need an upgrade, not a complete redo. But I think this allows you to look at that in the course of probably, quite frankly, who you're bringing in will have ideas as well.
Richard, you had your hand up there.
I think if we look at this even in the context of today's discussion with Councillor Dodd's earlier motion, as far as I'm concerned, the idea of the connected city starts with a strategic plan. So, you know, that's an item right there that we're going to be looking at in a new strategic plan.
John.
It does strike me, though, that as we bring a city manager on, a new city manager, that he or she might just want to make this his or her bailiwick and have the competency to do it. Not that Wayne doesn't, I'm not suggesting that, but again, it just strikes me as a nice to have, but it's $40,000, so I'd move to strike this.
Okay. Motion is on the floor to strike. Anyone want to speak to that? Seeing none, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? 1, 2. Opposed? Wait a minute. Okay, hold on. Oh, sorry. In favor. Thanks, Mary. In favor to strike it from the budget. 1.5, 2, 3. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's defeated. So it stays in.
The next item is a budget item that was basically approved in 2019, but since the actual activity for the most part completes in 2020, the budget for the Phelps Group to do the city manager recruitment is here. We're funding that entirely through taxation.
Okay. Does that cover our budget?
That is the budget before tax, yes,
Okay. and
before
that-
HST. I think the numbers that get quoted often are the total cost including HST. However, this is the total cost before HST, which is the actual amount that we pay.
Good, thank you.
Your worship, can I just speak to the city manager recruitment? Because together with, I think, Mr. O'Leary here, we were a bit leery about consulting, retaining a consultant for it. Whenever we retain a consultant, I think we have to really justify it. I was leery, having met the Phelps Group in closed session, I can tell they are outstanding, I can tell that, and they are adding real value. They are doing things that frankly we could not have done, or had we attempted to do it, I think would be done in an unprofessional and haphazard manner. So I just wanted to speak to that item. It's done anyways.
Larry, do we, go ahead.
Can you clarify why we take that cost out of taxation rather than anticipate over a certain period of time we would need to again hire consultants for staff recruitment, to put that as a reserve item so that there's, I mean, we know people do different things, and I'm just thinking that's coming directly out of taxation, yet we use reserves for other things, like our strategic plan. In a way, this is a strategic plan.
Often when we use reserves, we sort of have an anticipated timeline. So with the strategic plan, it was a 5-year plan.
Yeah.
With some of our replacement schedules that we contribute stable amounts to reserves, it's on a known replacement schedule. I wouldn't know what the right amount, frankly, to recommend to put into a reserve is. I don't know when we'll be hiring another city manager or a high-level position that we may require these funds for. If council wanted to start building a recruitment reserve, we could certainly look at that in our operating budget, and I can bring that back up again when we get to HR.
I would appreciate that being discussed in the future, please.
It's not break time, is it? Yep. Does Kate say it's break time?
One more, we'll just do fire quickly and then we'll take a break. So our chief isn't here, but I think for the most part we can address these as staff. The first item is an annual allotment to replace small equipment and hand tools used at the fire hall. These aren't necessarily individually identified within our asset management plan, but as you can imagine, all small tools have a useful life, and this budget is used on an annual basis. Bunker gear replacement. We do have a replacement schedule for our bunker gear. We make an annual flat contribution to that through the operating budget, and then as the bunker gear needs to be replaced on a varying time frame based on when staff are hired and the age of their suits, we're able to draw from that reserve. So this is this year's investment. It was anticipated and it's fully funded through the bunker gear reserve. The next item is a roof replacement. Kristen can speak to this certainly. The actual replacement of the roof is planned for 2021 with an estimated cost of $350,000, excuse me. So the $175 that we're budgeting for in 2020 is to set aside half of that now so that we can take on the other half in 2021. I would point out that this is one of those projects that's a multi-year project, and approving the project now is basically granting approval for that project so long as it moves ahead within budget. The next one is a carried forward item. This project was budgeted for in 2019. I'll let the director speak to why we're carrying it forward if there's any questions about that. So this project should be actually shown as funded through reserves because we have those funds brought forward from 2019.
Brian, questions?
I don't have a question. I move to strike that.
Okay, do you want to give sort of some thoughts behind?
Yeah, it's 20 feet.
If I could, Your Worship, I believe all of our staff, including the fire chief, we've got to do it, or we're not going to be able to get those trucks out short. We need to do it.
Dennis is just going to repeat what Wayne just said,
Oh,
basically.
absolutely. I mean, when I went out to have a look at it originally, you'll find that the asphalt's completely, it's reached at the end of its useful life. It's more rubble than anything else. It's held in place. The longer we wait, we will start seeing damage occurring to the apron that leads into the bays themselves, because there's an actual drop-off. So as you get those heavy vehicles, you can imagine how heavy they are, start pounding on that asphalt, because there is a lip of 50 millimeters, 2 inches in some areas, which will end up eating away at the concrete, so it'll become more expensive. This was a tough project to get done this year. Just we had staff shortages. We had a person off on medical for a while, and by the time we got a good price, it was actually beginning of November. The contractor did say they'd hold the price till next year in order for us to complete this project.
Thanks. Scott, you had your hand up. Need to add anything?
I was just going to speak against the motion. It's a very important job. I go by there routinely, and I look at the depressions and the deformation that's occurred. And boy, when that fire truck pulls out, I want it full of water, not empty of water, to make her. So it takes a lot of weight and a lot of stress turning and so forth. So we need to do that project.
Travis?
Thank you, Your Worship. On the second page, it talks about the fire hall ramp asphalt resurfacing, and we have a budget of just under 14 grand. So are we anticipating, was that a quote that we received last year, and or is that an in-house quote?
Thank you, Your Worship. That was for just the asphalt surfacing. As we looked more into it, we found out we had to replace a curb and out front of the building as well, out on the edge of the street. We have to shore up the area I just mentioned where it is showing, I guess, there's no bearing capacity to soil in front of the door, so we want to be able to excavate some material out of there as well to ensure it's properly compacted. So when we put the asphalt back, it holds up. So we had initial estimates, and then as you look more into it, as we get closer into it, do all the measurements, we end up giving a more refined number.
Do you have your hand back up, Brian? No? Okay. Anyone else want to speak to it? Seeing none, going to call the question. All in favor of Brian's motion to strike? 2, 4 opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so it is defeated.
The last item in this budget is the aerial platform replacement. This purchase order was approved, I believe, 2 council meetings ago, so the actual funds will be expended in 2020. It is going to be funded from reserves, however, it will create a deficit in that fire fleet reserve. So we will see in our operating budget an increase to the contribution to those reserves in order to fund this replacement, as well as the other planned fleet replacements at the fire hall.
Go ahead, Marion, and then John.
What happened to the interior enhancement?
Oh, sorry. In the published agenda, we have deferred that project. It's being recommended to transfer to reserves in 2019. However, in the actual published agenda, that item was no longer included.
It's being recommended to go to 2021 then, or what?
I'm not
Why
sure
are we
what the future
deferring that?
plan is, if you want to speak to that.
Thank you. We're looking at that in the future of that building, that there'd be some larger scale renovations, not just what we are trying to accomplish with the $40,000. So instead of spending 40 in 2019 or 2020, and then perhaps undoing what we've already done, a couple of years down the road, we decided to put that into a reserve and then look at the building as a whole and any future renovations that we would have.
So it's already removed from the calculations?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
That would be the difference on the front page where we saw 2891 versus 2851. It would have been that project specifically.
John, you had your hand up?
Okay, it's sort of a general question. Again, I learn everything I need to learn through the dressing room of my hockey games. Somebody asked about the aerial truck, and I went back to Michelle from purchasing, and I understand that this decision was made in 2016. Is that correct? To buy a new truck, or don't you know?
The actual recommendation probably first came forward in 2016. The actual approval to buy this truck happened about a month or so ago.
So is that a normal lag time for something like this? I was puzzled about why the decision would have been made in 2016. Because you recall, I had a concern about the point at which we're locked into an RFP and we have to comply. So if you could speak to that. Yeah.
We had not issued the RFP in 2016. It just went out in 2019. So There was a report that came forward through corporate services in 2019 that sort of gave authorization to move forward with the RFP and then, or tender, I guess it was in this case, and then we awarded that.
Carol?
So the current piece of equipment is I gather from the description, the intention is to sell?
That came up at the corporate services meeting. I'm sort of speaking based on what I heard as well. I'm not an expert on this truck. However, the intention would be to either hold that as a back support piece of equipment or as a secondary truck. At some point, there's a piece of equipment that we would no longer use. The goal would be to sell it. The value of that equipment is negligible, is my understanding.
So if it were to be sold, or any equipment in the city, where do those funds go? Where are they directed?
They go back into the reserves that we use to fund our fleet replacement. So if we buy a new truck and we sell the old truck, we generally don't get a significant amount of money from those sales, but anything that we do get goes back into the fleet reserves. And then as we look at our ongoing replacement schedules, they get brought into that calculation of what funds do we have available in order to ensure that our annual contributions to the reserves are realistic.
As we're moving towards strategic partnerships and mutual agreements, has any consideration ever been given in a shared arrangement where another organization might be able to use something like this?
A fire truck?
Go ahead, Charlie.
In the past, we have been able to borrow units from other municipalities. At one point, we were using a borrowed unit from Saugeen Shores to get us through. I think it would be useful maybe potentially at the next corporate services meeting or a corporate services meeting in the future to have Chief Barfoot come and give an explanation back about those rules of how I don't even know what it was, the fire associations, how many years we need to have, what can be equivalent to a frontline vehicle, then it can be a secondary vehicle, and then it can be a no longer vehicle, and then we get $0 for it. But if we could maybe get that Chief Barfoot to come and give that explanation, my concern would be is if I think we have a hard enough time trying to get mutual aid agreements as they currently stand, just to get a firefighter to come across our borders to do things, who actually have a fire hall in our borders. But to share those units, I think, I don't know, I'd love to see it. But
I think I can tell you the fire chiefs certainly in Grey County do share equipment on an as-needed basis. Absolutely. We're always prepared. This particular piece of equipment is probably going to be the only 100-foot aerial in Grey County, and you can bet if it's needed anywhere in Grey County, the chief would be glad to send it as long as we didn't need it. And vice versa has always held true. But there is certainly a better model for Grey County, but we'll see how that goes.
Brian?
I just wanted to say to Travis's point, it's a mandated lifespan for a fire truck, and that's why we made the decision in 2016, and that's why the money was already there, correct?
is it okay to get Chief Barfoot to do a presentation?
I think since these are funded through the operating budget, and we're actually going to be looking at that reserve contribution through the operating budget, he'll be here for that, so I'll recommend that he has that information either prepared in a report or just to speak to at that time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
We can break for 15 minutes.
Good, thank you.
Current information will be on your screen today as well. So the first one is our first one in your packages. It's a Kelso Beach electrical upgrade. So this RFP is actually out right now. It closes November 25th. So it has two phases. The first phase is the design. The second phase will be the actual construction of what's designed. The purpose really is to replace many outdated components and make it much easier to hold events at Kelso Beach Park for groups like Summer Folk and other large outdoor events.
I think this one needs just a little bit more, like I've read the RFP and the documents and the proposed expenditure on this needs a little bit more enlightenment in terms of what kind of return on investment that we foresee. Like what are the revenues that we're deriving from the park? I mean, could you ever capture or recapture the the potential investment on electrical upgrade in this case, or are we better just to continue to rent?
I like the pun, by the way, on enlightenment on electricity.
How this will work is, the RFP for this year is out. It will be awarded after November 25th when it closes. The plan and the design and what it includes will come through the Community Services Committee. So you'll have an ability to influence what is it that's being planned, how is that implemented, consistent with the development charges study. This chart reflects the 5-year capital. We've put $500,000 in here in year 2. Maybe, and it's all tax. Maybe we'll find a grant, maybe we'll find a partner, maybe our partner will find a grant. So it's into, and it might be phased in. So study, design, some thought to what that design means, what is the scope of the project, implementation. So you're not being asked to approve implementation.
If I could, Your Worship, and I think, again, good question, Councillor, and I'm going to say what may at times surprise Council, but not everything we do is to recapture full cost. And investing in our waterfront, if you recall our strategic plan, what we've heard from people, our waterfront is something that we do have to sell that many others don't. We want to get not only our residents down to the water, but people coming to see us. And if we don't invest in the facilities we have around the water, it's going to be difficult to do that in a meaningful way that actually showcases what we have. So this would be one where I would say, will we ever recapture this fully through revenues? Probably not. But it's part of our investment to get more people to come and say, not only do you have a lovely Harrison Park, we have a lovely Kelso Beach. The potential is all there. We need to invest a little bit in it.
Richard?
I certainly don't oppose investing in the infrastructure. I guess my only question is when I saw the revised sheet this morning with the 500,000 in for next year, I sort of went, gulp. So we're committing to the engineering study.
Yep.
We will have an opportunity then, after that's done, to determine what happens from there on. Okay, thank you.
So Pam, I was on the other side 22 years ago. Summerfolk came, or the Folk Society came forward, applied for grants to Trillium that the city could not, and we changed the level of the top of the amphitheater to be able to have more people see. Added some water piping. We changed the electrical to put some electrical outlets in the north end of the park. And I think we changed the main stage a little bit, but that's 22 years ago. And it was with some grants that we were able to get with partners that we can't get on our own. So the possibilities are, I'm sure it wasn't 500,000. We borrowed money from the city and came and paid it back that fall. I do remember that because the councillors were suggesting that maybe they should just forgive it to us and leave it with us. And my point at that point for summer folk was there may be a day that we need to come to the city, but it wasn't then. So and that day may be coming. Go ahead.
Can you please just familiarize me with this? Do we charge a rental for people to use this facility?
Yes.
So, as a principle for future, whenever we're looking at projects that we charge a rental, could we include conceptually that a rental review will be part of the process? I understand we don't necessarily want to get back, I mean, always it's nice to get back 100%, but I hear what you're saying. But I think it needs to go hand in hand. So I'm wondering if that's a possibility.
Sure.
I just have a question on point of order here, and Councillor Merton has had many excellent suggestions here this morning, but each of the suggestions is asking staff to take action. Should they not be accompanied by a motion that we all vote on?
Brianna is looking at me shaking her head yes, so I suppose yes.
So I'd like to make a motion that when we review budget process, any facilities that also charge a rental fee as part of their operation be incorporated within the evaluation when we move forward to approve budget. I'm not sure if that phrases it. Can someone assist me?
So are you thinking of something that's separate and distinct from the annual fees bylaw review that would look at each one of these facilities? So looking at the capital expense and particularly the revenue that it generates in an operating budget and tying those two together?
So this would trigger implementing a change, potentially. And that wouldn't be for every facility every year.
Right. So for example, we've invested significantly over the last few years in Harrison Park Campground. When we did then the fees bylaw review, we were able to say to you, given the investment in the renewed infrastructure, looking at what other campgrounds charge, here's how we think we can justify that. So I think certainly it's a very valid point. I think it happen, certainly over the course of that fees bylaw review, but I'll certainly leave it with council.
Motion is on the floor. Any other discussion? Scott?
I'm a little unclear on it, and I think because of that, I'm against it, because when various projects come to us, and I'm thinking of one we're going to see in a little bit about backstops at Harrison Field, and there's $300 of rental a year, I can draw from that. I can go back to the rates and fees, and I can think of a report in the past that had comparators, and if in discussion with council, if you don't like the comparators in the report, then you're able to go out and locate your own information. So I think staff are attempting to give us what they need, and if we feel like we need more, we still have that opportunity to go out and get it.
So based on the fact that we have a bylaw review that would feed into this, that would trigger that analysis. Based on that, I'm happy to withdraw the motion.
Okay, so motion is withdrawn. I was just going to say, my only concern is we've got a staff that's doing a pretty full job now. Each time we add something that we want analysis of this, we want a report on that, we want to add these things, we're going to be adding a lot of staff to try and get it done because we don't really have, I don't think we've got the capacity. So with that motion removed, we can keep going forward. Pam, go ahead.
So Kate had mentioned to you projects that are sort of underway and are running over a year. So the Harrison Park Community Hall is an example of that. We received an enabling accessibility grant, $97,000 late in 2019. We scrambled to engage an architect. Apparently architects in this town are busy to work with us on the design. Actually, we just got the design late last night, so we'll be reviewing that. And really the project is focused on accessibility upgrades in that community hall, accessible door openers, accessible parking spaces, the entrance to the building, as well as, very importantly, the washroom if you've ever tried to access that with someone in a walker or wheelchair. So a significant part of that funded through grants. The Harrison Park Inn washrooms for any of the committee any of council on Community Services Committee. Kristen's here. She can speak to the renewed lease with the Harrison Park Inn operator. But this is a shared project, $20,000 from both the city and the operator. Those washrooms will be joined together. Going forward, the inn operator will clean those washrooms and they will again be made accessible. The work will be done in-house to minimize disruption on the use at the park. Victoria Park Picnic Shelter, this is actually a project 100% funded by the Y. It's brought to you because it is in one of your parks, and the design will come through Community Services Committee, so there's no city money here.
So when it's completed, whose asset is it?
That would be negotiated. There would be an agreement with the city and the Y, but likely because it's on city property, it would be our asset. So in terms of increasing that yellow line, it would increase the yellow line.
Like, I love the fact that it's a donation, but I do worry about that yellow line.
Right. It has been part of, and you see here the picture includes the master plan for Victoria Park, and it was part of that planned design for the park, that shade structure.
Yeah, I'm fine with this. How these come forward to council as ideas, especially when you get a large grant behind it, makes it very hard for council to not extend the yellow line. So, you know, I think a splash pad at the little Ryerson Park would be great. Used to have a little wade-in pool there, it'd be great. I could be on my own little island. But if somebody then gives you $100,000 in a donation towards a project like that, it makes it difficult not now to enhance our facilities. And what kind of parameters do we work off of then? Like, I understand the plans. Is it more important that we just scrutinize every plan then that comes before us? Because if you get these little ideas in there and somebody says, well, I'll fund the construction of it, now you're on the hook. These seem to come and go, and it can leave council in a very challenging spot.
Interesting how they would come forward to you, and that's always a challenge, because we do have wonderful partners. We know who they are. They come forward quite regularly and say, we can help you. The really wonderful partners pick a project that's already on our yellow line and is up for renewal. I think what you'll see in the future, and the province hasn't finalized how the AMP programs will work in the end, but I think what you'll see is, you will say, we're going to do this, it's a new venture, it's a new building. You need to start funding in the next year's budget or that year's budget for replacement of that building. And I think council will have opportunities at that time to say, this is great, we're not going to refuse this building because it's brought forward by the YBC Corporation giving us full grants. We're not adding it to the yellow line. Everybody's on record. When that building's done in 30 years, council of that day didn't commit to ever replacing it. I think that's the best way to work, the simplest way, but we haven't got there yet. But it is difficult for us to turn away some of our very willing partners without council turning them away. And you are absolutely right, Councillor. It's tough to do.
So dealing with the one in front of us, we had a Parks Master Plan a few years ago that identified these types of things. If you've been up there on that Nutty Day, whatever it's called, where all the kids are on the
Skate park?
skateboard park day, and there's no place to get out of the sun or to hide. Same thing, lacrosse tournaments and things like that. There's families that are hanging around out there, and there's isn't a picnic table, etc. So again, it was identified in the Parks Master Plan by council, and sometimes there's frustration on the other end that we approve a master plan in 1842 and it takes us 25 years to build it out. I'm exaggerating, obviously, with years and times, but
We do our
this is
very
here.
best to point these partners to projects that are identified in master plan and try to have a high priority. Duncan McClellan Park bleachers, again, a carry forward project that tender was awarded by council in July of 2019. The majority of the on-site work is done except for the placement of the bleachers that will happen in the spring. Harrison Park Workshop roof, the assessment is being done this fall. There's two types of roof. One is the built-up roof, and then you have the rolled asphalt. We'll be doing the assessment, and then the roof sections will be repaired and replaced in 2020 with the $20,000. The Harrison Park Sanitary Connection. There's two projects here. The first is the community hall. It's the last building in Harrison Park that's on a holding tank. We are seeing some infiltration of groundwater into that tank, so it's an important time to make this connection. It's an important green initiative and connect it to the city sanitary sewer. The second is on the right-hand side, you'll see the main Harrison Park washroom and shower facility. If you were on the parks tour, you saw it's upgraded during busy weekends this year. The sewer line is failing and it's starting to back up, so both of those will be replaced. $60,000 coming from campground reserves with $15,000 from tax. This project, the Harrison Park Community Hall, really goes hand in hand with the accessibility upgrade. The pictures don't really do it justice, but it will complement that other work. The roof is well past its useful life. The soffit and fascia is a haven for squirrels. It's amazing how many nuts are stored up there, and also repointing this unique stone structure. So as well as lighting, retrofit indoors, painting, and repairs. It'll be done by a combination of city staff and contractors.
So as many nuts as in the council chamber? Or?
More. Harrison Park Community Hall outdoor stairs. These stairs provide an important linkage between the community hall and the open space areas. They're wooden, they're failing, they're a liability concern, and we'd like to replace them with a metal stair with railing on both sides, partially funded by DCs and partially by TAPs.
This is one here that I'd like to have more discussion on. Every piece that we put into development charges, if we incorporate new fees into our new plan, has the potential to be a little bit of an inhibitor for some people accessing the market, or potentially our ability to be competitive in constructing new homes. So my first issue is with the $9,000 being allocated to development charges, but also I look at other stairs like the at the mill dam that go up, and for the distance that would make the mill dam stairs like a $75,000 kind of liability, what we've got there, just if you're going off of the sheer distance. I think this is one that we need to have a little bit more discussion or look at some alternatives. $25,000 is a lot of money to allocate to the replacement of these stairs. I'm sure they need to do something, or we need to do a little bit, but $25,000 is a lot, and I think allocating some to development charges is a little problematic.
Kate?
Through your worship, and I apologize, I'll address the development charges comment first. While it is properly funded in the overall budget, we did not update this sheet for the decision that was made by council a couple weeks ago to remove outdoor recreation from the development charges levy. Therefore, we would not be funding this through development charges. It could potentially be funded through the new CBC charge, and that bylaw hasn't even been started yet. But for now, there would be no development charges, so this project is in fact fully funded through taxation.
I'm somebody that went down on their behind on those stairs a couple of years ago. Cub Day, Scout Day, whatever it is, these stairs aren't in good shape. At the end going down towards the entrance to the campground, there's nothing there but ice in the winter. And what's a legal claim cost us? I didn't sue.
But are you not going to, because you're in a sheltered environment, you've got snow accumulation, you're going to have that same snow and ice development, whether you've got the wooden and ground conditions or whether you've got steel stairs. Like, that's still a challenging environment where it is.
I suspect for $25,000 they're going to be designed better.
Through your worship, I think the stairs would be the slatted steel, much like the 7th Street staircase. So even when it snows, much of the snow actually falls through the fabric of the stairs, so they do require minimal maintenance and allow for almost year-round use. So A, long lifespan, B, lower maintenance, C, not as aesthetically pleasing, but lower maintenance.
Go ahead.
I know that eyes tend to roll whenever we mention liability, and it's unfortunate. What we have to remember when we talk liability is a 72-year-old woman or a 78-year-old man with some balance issues fracturing their hip and being rendered into a nursing home. I don't mean to be melodramatic, but this stuff happens, and stairs are an obvious threat to the well-being of citizens. So I have no problem with this. I wonder, Pam, if you could flip back to 20D6. I'm a little confused why this, and it's 45 grand. Why is that high again? You mentioned something about squirrels?
Oh,
Sorry, no, I wasn't being glib. I'm just trying to understand why this is high.
through you, Your Worship, it would replace the asphalt shingled roof, redo the soffit and fascia. The pictures aren't, you can't really appreciate the holes in the soffit and fascia. It just needs to be renewed. The stone exterior needs to be repointed. Inside, we would do a lighting retrofit to a higher energy LED fixture. With our own staff, we would do painting and renewal. So at the same time as we're doing the accessibility upgrades, we'd really do a refresher of this well-used community facility.
Can it wait a year? Like, what would the downside be of waiting a year? Again, I'm sort of woke up this morning, I said, gee, we did the Riverside, we're doing the bridge, we got a lot of things, and whatever can wait, can wait. So I'm just asking, yeah.
I can answer the question, but I don't know if you...
Why don't you go ahead and answer the question, and go to Richard.
The roof is in poor condition. I'm not sure it's leaking at this point, but we hate to wait till it's totally leaking.
It's in rough shape. Go ahead, Richard.
Just wondered, it says right at the top of the category, the city was successful in an application to this fund. So is there additional money on top of the $45,000, or is it reflected in the $45,000? How does that come into play?
Through your worship, if we go back to, this one, that is the accessibility upgrades, the washroom, kitchen, ramp, outside, inside, the accessibility piece. So then they would be done at the same time. The building would be sort of renewed and refreshed, all at the same time.
So it's a $200,000 project that we're paying $45,000 towards, and I certainly don't have any problem with that at all. This facility is so well used, and it is such a mainstay in that park that I certainly think it's worth doing.
Yeah, I should bring a motion, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, it's
So
time.
apologize for that. I move that we strike this item and bring it up next year.
Okay, further discussion of that
This
motion?
being 20D6.
Yep.
This is one I won't, I'll look back to, I think 2016. I think one of the best things that we did is we put 2 individuals on the city payroll, and we kind of gulped anytime you add staff to the operational side of things. But retrospectively, it's 2 that Kristen's been able to make terrific use out of, those people going through less higher need buildings. And when I say higher needs, I mean your bigger commercial or industrial facilities. But on that list of extensive list of the properties we own, they've been able to do a great job overhauling and refreshing these properties, whether it's in the playgrounds or yeah. I think this is probably corresponding with where she would like to position these people in terms of the long-term project and getting work done. And I guess this should be, and these staff should be allocated proportionally both in operational and capital. So if there's an allocation of the capital budget, some of their staff time, it should be less in the operational side of things. But for that reason, I support, they've done a great job over the years, in the last 3-4 years, and what they've accomplished. And this, as Councillor Thomas mentioned, this building needs a lot of work, and it's been neglected a long time. So I'll be voting against that.
So, Richard?
Just a question, if we proceed with the work that we've received the grant for and we delay this piece of work, does the price go up?
Through your worship, Kristen had just pointed out to me that there certainly are some efficiencies of mobilizing and doing one bigger project than 2 smaller projects.
Okay, so for that reason, I'll oppose the motion, Your Worship.
I'm going to call the question so we can keep moving forward. So all in favor of John's motion to strike this? So there's 2, 4, who's against? So majority is opposed, so it is defeated. Thanks.
This is, it doesn't feel like a very attractive project, but a necessary project. It's the line painting and markings in Harrison Park. So just like our roadways and parking lots, these lines need to be refreshed. Staff would like to pull this request at this time, as we don't have the necessary IT connectivity to make it happen.
So it wasn't previously pulled. That's a -10 then, Kate, from our list.
20D11. Mile Drive trail improvements. Mile Drive is certainly a popular and heavy used trail. We have an accessible spine of trail connectivity for pedestrians from the 2nd Avenue entrance and bus stop through now basically to the community hall. We'd like to add the Mile Drive to that. This does a couple of things, really increases accessibility, but this is also a trail where we struggle with some erosion, and by hard surfacing the trail, it would increase or lessen maintenance and in erosion that happens.
Good, thank you. Either. Go ahead, Travis.
I just wondered, so, you know, the trail is great now. Like, what a huge improvement just putting down the gravel was. And I guess my question is, it just says resurfacing here, but I mean, there's certainly a couple of areas that wash out almost annually along there, and I'm thinking of the ravine on the east side, about midway down towards where the trail cuts up to the conservation area. Will there be culvert work done? Will there be ditches? I mean, what's the extent of the work? Because I'm concerned that if we just resurface what we've got there now, that we're going to have trouble with the same kind of problems.
Through your worship, next week we have a contractor coming in to do some, I want to say erosion, water, ditching, clean out, culvert work in that area.
Travis?
Worship, just my question, yes, it's coming from the federal gas tax, but this is the same amount of money that we're allocating for our total resurfacing for the entire 2020 years. And I do agree that even that, how we had that hard paved area, it made things perfect to get the Kiwanis accessibility part. And it's been able to work that way. I'm just wondering what council feels on what our end goal is. I know that some people have
Travis is a flasher.
Yep. They didn't like what I was saying, so I'll shut up, I guess. No, it's okay. It's okay. I'm done flashing. No, I'm still flashing. Anyways, I'm just kind of wondering what our plans are. One, I know like how Richard had just mentioned there about erosion and some of those aspects, but is there another way that we can look at doing these trails? We have a lot of trails in that system that isn't just asphalt. I know asphalt's easier for we can get a little plow down there, but I know in Saugeen Shores they did something, or I think it was Saugeen Shores where they did, it was an accessible pathway, but they were able to use some other mechanism to do it. It might not have been Saugeen Shores, it might have been another municipality. Anyways, my biggest thing is I'm just saying we spent $100,000 this, which is equivalent to what we're doing for asphalt resurfacing for the entire city on this area. It lasts 15, 20 years. We're back into another system of paying another $100,000. And not ever to quote Jim McManaman in a way that he would never want to be quoted, but when you go back to that 100-year plan of asphalt resurfacing and the dire need of, when you look at later on a report in operations, of some of those roads that have actually are 0% that they've completely failed, that we're still asking a residents to drive on, and then we're allocating $100,000 to this, when is there another option that we could be looking for these? I don't know. I'm not making a motion. I just would like to hear what other councils' plans or thoughts are.
Go ahead, Brock.
My information sheet here has it that it's a part of the multi-year accessibility plan, and that it's a grant, not the gas tax.
The grant is gas tax.
Oh.
So they changed the gas tax grant a few years ago to then include trails, encouraging that sort of multimodal transportation.
But we're free to use the 100, so to speak, on a road as much as on this path, right?
You could. We sort of went gangbusters this year on roads,
Yeah.
thinking that
I hadn't noticed.
In 2020, our focus wouldn't be so much roads because there'll be enough disruption.
So, Mr. Mayor and fellow councillors, where do we get the most bang for our buck? What I hear a lot of complaints about are still roads that really could use some resurfacing. Is this trail used by perhaps a few hundred people, maybe 1,000, versus a road that's used every day by thousands? I see what Travis's point is. I'll move to strike this item, and with the hope that the 100 would be applied to roads instead.
Is that motion clear, Brianna? So it's sort of like that two-part, remove it and add it to asphalt, I think is what you're moving? Yes, okay, discussion. Richard, I think you had your hand up.
Sorry, John, I'm not going to support the motion. I think that, my questions weren't a lack of support for the resurfacing. 2 years ago, we took a lot of heat for resurfacing the front part of that trail in some public quarters, and it has turned out to be the best thing we've ever done in that park. I run through there quite frequently, and people have stopped me in my run to comment on how grateful they are that we have paved that part of the trail. I would say, strictly from a historical perspective, which I do know a little bit about, the Mile Drive is an Owen Sound institution. You can't talk to anybody in Owen Sound without hearing about the Mile Drive. Again, when I run through there, very rare an occasion when there's not 2 or 3 other people on that trail at the same time that I am. I think that the traffic through there is constant. I think it's an important part of the history of Harrison Park, and I certainly support making it more accessible, especially to the older generation, which maybe remembers the Mile Drive a lot better than some of us do, but can't get back up in there any longer.
Richard, the memories of the Mile Drive aren't necessarily too much information. Someone else was down here, and then I'll keep working this way. Go ahead, Scott.
I know exactly what you're saying. I'm on that trail all the time. But this is one where I would like to see this settle for a year or two. It's a new addition. Let's see how it goes. The asphalt trail is great at the north end of the park, but we're going to see later on, there's already a $5,000 request for some improvement on slope failure along that. So it's an improvement, but it's not perfect. And there is some areas of concern on this area of the park and the Mile Drive that could undergo the same type of undermining and slope failure. And it could happen because we've already seen it in the north end occur. So I will support the motion. It's road resurfacing that I hear over and over from people. It's the breakdown on vehicles. Our buses we're paying twice for and over. So I think it's a good motion at this time. It used to be paved back there. Back in the day, the Mile Drive used to be asphalt, but at this time I think it's still a nice to have and not a totally need to have. So I'll support the motion.
I'm still coming this way, am I? Travis?
Sorry, I didn't mean to get into that conversation. I was more meaning, do we have another alternate, is there another option that we can use instead of just pavement, or instead of asphalt? I just remember when we went through that whole debacle before, people came out and saying there was other routes that we could have done, whether it was plank board or whatever it was, and besides us just saying, yes, we're going to spend $100,000 and resurface this and we're going to make it asphalt, is there an alternate option to just doing asphalt or just the compacted sand dust or dust, whatever the heck it is, dust stone?
The compacted screenings, which are the limestone screenings that really are on the trail now, are really probably the second most accessible. After concrete and asphalt, probably the second most accessible are those hard-packed limestone screenings.
Okay. Brian.
That's sort of what I was going to ask, but I don't know what it's called. If you go to Lincoln Park and turn right, they did that on the highway. It's not asphalt, and it's not like the I don't know if Adam knows it, or Dennis, but it isn't asphalt. Anyway, my point, I'm kind of torn here. To John's point, with the asphalt, I think Marion is talking about bringing a motion forward later on that anything that we save on capital here she wants to go towards asphalt. So keeping that in mind, I still want to keep this as is with asphalt.
Brock?
I'll support the motion. I definitely favor hard services over soft services, and I think that fits here.
I'm a little confused.
Using gas tax on hard services as opposed to using it on a nice to have.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do recall this coming up a few years ago, and I can't think of the guy's name that we had for a year in a contract looking at trails. Yeah, and he brought forward a report on it, and I remember getting bombarded with photos and comments from people that didn't want to see it paved at that point. The front is a little different in that it was the only route into the park. There were, anyway, people that wanted it because they like to run, they like to do things that they didn't want to always be running on hard surfaces was the feedback that I got at the time. You know, we all get feedback from people and get opinions, and it doesn't mean that that represents everybody in the community, but that was some of the ones that I got at the time. So I will, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, I have an odd vote no matter what. I'll call the question. All in favor of John's motion to strike? 1, 2, 3. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. So that motion is defeated. This stays in.
Harrison Park Bridge Maintenance, we have a bridge study. It's one of the attachments I provided that wasn't attached. It's a 8.5 by 11 summary of those, the bridge and culvert inspections. There's 3 bridges. One is the South Mile Drive Bridge. The second is the bridge over to the Toboggan Hill, and the third is the pedestrian bridge to the island. So the engineer has identified maintenance that needs to be done. So this would do that maintenance. A bollard.
I think we're going to go back to that, Pam. Go ahead, Brian.
Just a little bit off topic. That stone wall that's right there, what did we end up doing with that?
So we did a trial, that's the bridge, the one in the right photo, the bridge to the Toboggan Hill.
Right.
And it did have a built stone wall. We said to you, there are built stone walls in the park that are really important, and we should replace them with built stone walls. We said there's others, maybe we can get away with a different, much cheaper solution. Let's try this. We have tried this. The stabilization of the bank has worked very well, and we haven't had any negative comments.
Okay, good, thanks.
So we've got 3 bridges there. The south bridge back up at the back of the campground is used by snowmobiles. We can't really...
And pedestrians.
And pedestrians. We can't really end that one. The main one that goes to the ski hill, there's a parking lot over there, so we can't really eliminate that one. And the other one is what it is, so it's, yeah, okay.
We started a program this year of bollard replacement in Harrison Park, and we would like to continue to replace bollards in Harrison Park. The work's done by city staff. Replace these broken and missing bollards and keep cars and other vehicles off the grass and minimize that turf damage. The Harrison Park Inn doors, so the inn was built in 1987. The doors are original and they're past their useful life. They're corroded from salt and just time, and it would include one automatic door opener has been refurbished. The sturgeon sculpture. So this is an attachment that you were provided today. So in 2017, we developed a partnership with the Reconciliation Garden Committee. There's been several reports through Community Services Committee, and they have undertaken their Phase 1 construction of the Reconciliation Garden at Kelso Beach, and it includes the dry stone bed. They're asking for a contribution from the city between $15,000 and $25,000 for this 5-meter by 1-meter sculpture. They would commission the artwork, and then it would be placed if you've seen the dry stone bed, there's 2 pedestals where this sturgeon would be placed. So we've shown it as 15 from taxation, looking to the reconciliation garden to come to the table with anything over and above the 15,000.
This is one that we watched go through our community services department for a few years, and I thought it was a nice project, but it along the way was under the condition that they were generating all the funds necessary, and city staff have contributed along the way with staff time and some resource and materials and resources. I think coming from taxation, $15,000. I just have, there's people have said to me, they don't understand what the steel monument is that's already there at the east end. I think this is another one that's just going to raise a lot of questions in the public about using their tax dollars to fund it. So I would, if we allocate 15,000, I mean, their design could range from 10,000 to 25,000. If you allocate 15,000, the design's going to be 25,000. Like that's just the way it's going to be. So I would move to strike the $15,000 from taxation on this, just from what I've gathered from community feedback.
So I can speak to this because I remember the first time I think it was operations that they came to, and I think it was 2008. I could be wrong, or it might have been 2010 at Parks. And yes, they did want to fund it themselves, and they wanted to do it within a couple of years, and it hasn't happened. Since then, we've had a federal decision on reconciliation. I think we're lucky that we've got such a rich history, the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation around here, a rich history of that neighborhood of Kelso. And I think we discovered that park is actually probably supposed to be called Nawash Park in Kelso Beach. I remember having a heated discussion with Jim about that at one of those meetings and discovering that after. This is a great opportunity to recognize our history and our heritage that has been forgotten perhaps or ignored. Canada Day a couple of years ago, we had a great event down there. Brian was there, I don't remember who else, on this. With the reconciliation decision and report that came through the federal government, it's hard for us to say that we're involved in the reconciliation when really we've given the ground, and I don't think we've given any other really much other work to it. I think it's a great design. I think it's important for us as far as those monuments that are there already. If you've got people asking questions, that's fantastic, because we're already a step ahead when people start to ask questions about their own geographic history. There's little report sheets in each of those monuments all the way around for the whole walking tour. I think there's an audio that you can click into for that walking tour too, and actually listen online to the explanation of what pieces of history were at each of these. I think for us to put up to 25,000, but looking at 15 from taxation is a drop in the bucket for the goodwill in our own community and with our Saugeen Ojibwe Nation that we're continuing to work with. We will have to continue to work with based on Supreme Court decisions on consulting on things that involve water, land where they've made a claim, etc. Those things are going to happen, and the more you can build the relationships with your neighbors, I think this is a pretty cheap investment to do that. So that's my point.
So I think everything that Mayor Boddy just said, we could also say next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, when another 20 and another 15. So I just kind of, I feel like we've already done our part. So why don't we go over what we've already done? Have we not done plaques? Like I remember helping with, and I might be wrong here, didn't we help with our machinery and staff help do something? Like what have we done in the past?
I think I think we're maybe confusing two projects. One is the Walking is Medicine tour, and there's 4 sculptures, and we did place, our staff did, no, we didn't assist. We prepared the beds for the stones this year, but the stones were too heavy for our staff to lift, so they had someone put them on those platforms. So Adam, just help me here. I don't think we've got any, like, obviously city staff time and working with the Reconciliation Garden Committee, but not a lot of staff time. That work on the garden there was done by a contractor, paid for by the Reconciliation Garden Committee. So I don't think we have any budget allocation
So
to
is this, will
project.
this be it, do you think? So will this kind of finish up the project, like this will be it?
It won't be. So they've, if you look at the sketch that you have, they're doing it in several phases. And the first phase was sort of the outline and the dry stone bed. So this will finish the dry stone bed with the sculpture. But their plan was to implement it in several phases. There is an interpretive plaque that's been finished. The wording went through Community Services, so that will, you know, to Mayor Body's point, be an important part of helping people understand the story.
So maybe we should have the bigger conversation of what is this entire project and how much are we going to play a part in it? And I just, you know, I mean no disrespect whatsoever, but I feel like we're doing our part.
But just to be clear, in front of us, we have something on the budget for a sturgeon sculpture. There's nothing on this budget that commits us to future years, to future projects, to future steps. We had to look at those at the time. The only commitment that we're making here is $25,000 to a sturgeon sculpture. It's 15, technically, sorry, 15 from taxation. So it's not committing us to anything except for what's in front of us. Richard, go ahead.
I'm going to oppose the motion. You know, I think back to when the discussion began about building the Black History Cairn in Harrison Park, and what a crazy plan everybody thought that was. And it turned out to be an award-winning installation that people visit from all over the world. You cannot go down to that park that there are not people there. I think it was a forward-thinking action on the part of the city, and I look at this in the same way. Here we've got an installation that has been largely put together by a volunteer group, and they're asking us for some help. And I see this Reconciliation Garden in the same way that I look at the Black History Cairn, and I think that it's a forward-thinking move on the part of the city. Well, actually, probably it's 100 years overdue, but at this point, I think that, you know, it's a small contribution we're being asked to make to what I think will become a significant feature in that part of our city and will draw people from all over as well.
So I would agree with that. Thanks for bringing that up, because one of the things I was thinking about is that it's so isolated. This is the only thing we're doing, and if it's not, then so be it.
Go ahead, Carol.
What is our safety and security strategy around the Black History Cairn and this sculpture, if it's approved? You know, we've had recently concerns about graffiti and signs and stickers being placed where they shouldn't be. So we want to make sure that it's protected. Do we have security cameras? I mean, how do we protect the interpretive plaques in a way that we can monitor for them for safety?
We don't, and I guess the best security is having more people in the space so that people who might do vandalism don't feel like that's a good place to do it.
I'm going to call the question on this, and I think it was Scott's motion. You want to wrap something up?
Yeah, if I could just finish. Like, we aren't retaining purchasing, like, procurement power on this, are
No,
we? Like, I reinterpret this as we are, through taxation, donating $15,000, and we're not maintaining any say in how we buy it. Like, we've got a small grants budget currently. No, we don't have a grant. Like, it strikes me, when you don't maintain procurement control, it's a different way of treating the asset than other ones, right? Everything else here, we are maintaining the ability to purchase and procure. This one is not being retained by ourselves, so I don't know, to me, it just needs to be treated different, or spoken to for that.
If I could, Your Worship, the call or the commission of the artwork will be done by the volunteer organization so that it can continue and make sure it reflects the spirit that's intended. It will be, however, a piece of public art, and you have your public art policy, and so the ultimate design will be very much like you see before you, but it will come through community services. So you won't have procurement power per se, but you will, through the public art policy, be able to approve the design.
It's kind of set out in the report that it would be a welded steel left to oxidize naturally, and it's 16 feet long. Like it's sort of there. There was some discussion that, I'm not saying that we would do this, but there was some discussion that potentially the art gallery could even be involved in selecting or running the contest on it. But it's it was a discussion about a contest or how they would go about getting the artist to make the proposal. So it's not like buying a truck. Anyway, I'm going to call the question with that. All in favor to strike this? So this is to strike it, right? It was your motion to strike. So Scott's motion to strike this. All in favor? 1, 2, 3 opposed. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is defeated, and we're not striking it. Go ahead.
Your Worship, Pam, can you just, just back up 1 to D16 there? I just had a quick question. When we replace those doors, I don't know if Kristen's noticed, but when you go in those doors in a wheelchair, there's a step. You can't go in frontwards, you have to turn the wheelchair around and go in backwards. Will that be rectified, replacing those doors?
Sorry, which one is on?
On D16, like the one previous slide?
So it'd be the Harrison Park Inn, the new doors of the Harrison Park Inn.
Yeah, so we'll look at trying to fix that as well. Where the issue is that the interior elevation and the exterior elevation, starting at the ramp or where the top of the stairs are at two different elevations. So if we can pour something there to bring that even, then we'll be able to address that and then have a proper threshold.
Right, okay, thanks.
Thanks.
So the next project is 20D18. This is the Phragmites removal. It's a high priority of the Kelso Beach Master Plan. We have made significant progress with council's support over the last several years. For a few years, we hired 2 summer students who had the job of cutting Phragmites at Kelso Beach Park. Last year, we tried a piece of amphibious equipment working with the Phragmites Control Center. We spent $16,000 in 2019, and it worked very well. So this is proposing to do more areas along both sides of the Potawatomi River and in 2020 at a cost of $50,000. There's an offset in the operating budget to remove those 2 student positions again. We didn't have them this year, and we wouldn't have them again next year. Trees at the Eddie Sargent Parkway in 2017 as part of the Canada 150 Own Sound 160 celebration with TD Tree Days in Neighborhoods North. There were 150 trees planted at Kelso Beach Park. 31 of them, unfortunately, the service berries planted have failed. The other trees, the Manitoba ash and service berries, did very well. We would replace with mountain ash along that stretch, or service berries, which died. Service berries died, so we're not putting those back in there. Mountain ash that are much more tolerant to wet conditions.
Just my only question on that one is, I get a lot of comments from people as to why the trees were planted essentially underneath the hydro corridor. Are these going to be moved a little bit more out of alignment with maybe the ones that people are speaking of and in terms of a long-term thinking on it?
Yeah, and through your worship, thank you for the question. We selected species that would not grow to a height that would interfere with the hydro lines, and I did work with Hydro One on making sure those parameters were reviewed before we did the planting.
Next, the Kelso Campground Washroom. Again, on the parks tour, you saw the interior refurbished for this campground washroom. It's really well used, and it's an important part of special events at Kelso Beach. $9,000 for exterior roof, soffit, and fascia, and some of this work, this work will be done by contractors. Kelso Campground booth, the way the door is situated proximate to the sidewalk makes it unusable. Staff, our in-house staff would move the door to the other side of the building, and it would be funded through campground reserves. Kelso Beach Amphitheater grading, if you've been at Summerfolk when it's raining, you'll note that unfortunately, the grade in the amphitheater runs toward that section of flagstone at the bottom of the amphitheater. This money would be to create positive drainage, and it would be done by a combination of city staff and contractor, but make this space more usable when it's wet. The Kelso Campground electrical service, when we were doing the Kelso Campground washroom, we noted a deficiency in the electrical service, and so these funds would be used to upgrade the underground services from the pole to the building, as well as replace the 200 amp meter base and the 200 amp panel with breakers.
Just a quick question. Looking at third picture on the right, shows a whole bunch of cords coming out, going into the ground. Is that really what it looks like? Obviously it is. That's nuts.
Not photo enhanced.
Yeah. That is the actual site condition. What you don't see, though, is removed is the protective device just around that, but you can go up and just take that apart and expose those wires. So we fasten that back onto the wall to make it safe for now, but we definitely have some upgrades to do electrical-wise.
Wow. Thanks.
Similar to Harrison Park, a 3-year plan to replace those bollards at Kelso Beach Park. Sorry, it's a 2-year program. Currently, there's unauthorized parking, and people like to drive into that park.
Richard?
I support the program because, again, you know, how much money do we spend repairing turf when people decide to go and do some donuts in there? My question would be, you know, we see the squat wooden bollard to the right there in the picture, and I don't find that to be particularly attractive. Will we be replacing with something that's maybe a little more aesthetically pleasing?
I think we have 6x6 pressure-treated posts, and we'll leave them a little higher.
Okay.
What would happen if we used rocks or something? Would they last longer? Could they be moved? They wouldn't. Sorry.
Sorry, I thought asking if rocks would last longer than the pressure treated was actually I thought you were kidding.
Adam,
Laughing, that's the best joke you've made all day, Your Worship.
There used to be a book that John can tell you about on cross-examination by lawyers where they ask if the deceased person was in fact dead when they first found them on the side of the road type thing. Anyway, I guess there's obvious answer to that, but I wonder if that would be a better alternative, if it would enhance the visual. I don't know.
I think the aesthetics of rocks would certainly be different. It would be kind of inconsistent in where we've got to so far. But, and Adam tells me people do move rocks.
Unless you're replacing all of them, then you're going to have hit and miss all over the place. Okay, thanks.
I don't think that's a horrible idea to start thinking about, because I know it's going to be expensive when the ledge rock and ask for a boulder to drop it down. But we live in the Niagara Escarpment, and we have so many surrounding municipalities that have that, or we could talk to the Great Level Conservation or something. If we can do something where someone's doing an extraction and they have those aspects.
What we could do is look at where rocks may be suitable in terms of what are our needs, where do we need to do this, map it out, where rocks may be suitable, and then price either how much would it cost to either buy them, or if they're free, essentially getting somebody to be able to get them and place them. So we can look at that.
I'm going to respond to Councillor Kennedy saying there's no such thing as free rock, but there's no such thing as placing $5,000 to bollards for an infinity of time, as well as paying $15,000 for rocks and not touching that on a capital budget again for the next 20 years. And I think if we're looking at the longevity of such items, that's where something I think we should start be looking at.
Okay. I'll move on to Inner Harbor benches. This year, we replaced $7,000 worth of benches. They're aging, staff have to paint them, and they don't have armrests, which means they don't meet current accessibility standards. So we'd like to replace the remaining benches along the Inner Harbor with low maintenance and accessible benches, and it would be funded by the Tom Williams Fund. And those executors are supportive of this project. West Side Boat Launch Washroom, not a building we went in on our parks tour, but I can assure you that it's dated, and it would certainly benefit from the refresh, and the work would be done by city staff. West Side Fish Cleaning Station, certainly a popular and important facility. The roof is beyond its useful life, and so this would replace that roof.
Just a question on that one. Was it examined putting like a steel strapping on it? Because the trees just sit over top, and anytime you have tree leaves, they just sit in the shingles, and then it just rots over time. So
We're hoping to use a steel roof.
okay, and that's the cost, obviously.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm a little shocked at the price of $7,000 for such a small unit, because can't you do a whole house for 5? No?
Again, depending on the material, so if we just went with asphalt shingles, it could be maybe about $4,000. But if we can do steel, which will last a lot longer, a lot less maintenance, then we would try to do that. With the price of steel right now too, it's hard to confirm which material we'll use because that fluctuates so much. So we're hoping for steel.
Okay, good, thank you.
Over to Alexandra Park at the bottom of St. Mary's Hill. Features some aging planting beds, walkway stairs. There's wood rot in here. We would propose to do some neighborhood consultation and develop a new landscape plan, and it would be executed by a city and contractor. Duncan McClellan surge protection. So much like the surge protectors you have in your home to protect things like your computers, we have new LED energy efficient lights at Duncan McClellan. And this surge protector would protect those lights as well as the building from a lightning strike. Harrison Field backstop replacement. So if you can picture Harrison Field, there are currently 4 ball diamonds. They're considered Class C facilities. The project would be to remove the smallest of the diamonds, totally decommission that. Of the remaining 3, we would keep the northwest and the southwest diamonds. The backstop structure itself would remain, and then there would be new mesh, fence mesh put on that. That's option 1, and that's what's recommended by staff. Councillor Merton, kind of to your point, here's your annual rentals from 2017, 18 and 19, so between $550 and $306. $306 doesn't seem like it's about an hour and a half of ice time, but that equates to 72, almost 73 hours of diamond rental. So not a complete business case. Diamonds are rented fairly cheaply, but reducing the number of fields from 4 to 2.
Richard?
They say the diamonds are forever, but in this case, I'm not so sure. Sorry, I don't have anything to say. I just wanted to make that joke here with
008, Richard Bond.
I guess that, I may be struggling a little with this one. It's not a lot of money, but I just wonder if the usage, that's the usage we're getting now. If it's never going to improve, can we justify this over the long term? Is it worth going ahead with the work when we know that we could probably not do it and it wouldn't be a big deal? I guess I'm just looking for a comment there on...
If I could, Your Worship, very same discussion we had at our staff meeting. We left it in, we gave council all the facts. There's no right or wrong. We had the very same discussion.
Just follow up then. So in terms of local minor baseball, how big a dent is this going to put in their ability to run a league if we decide to take these diamonds out of the field of play?
Through your worship, primarily baseball is the Owen Sound minor sport. They do use Kinsman Park and Tom Williams Park, not necessarily this park. This park is primarily used for some of the slow pitch tournaments. I just wanted to confirm with Adam, if we're not going to fix these backstops, they are becoming to a point where they're no longer safe, and we should just remove them. I would remind you, we have our Recreation Parks and Facilities Master Plan. If we were going to repurpose the field, I think our commitment to the public would be to follow the process outlined in the Master Plan.
Scott, next.
We do need to re-examine what we're doing down there. I'm going to move a motion to remove this from the budget. That $306 representing 74 hours, if you place that or distribute it over about 3 diamonds and put 24 hours to work, that covers about a Friday night game and Saturday and Sundays for one soft slow pitch tournament in September. So we need to have a bigger discussion on what we're going to do with this park moving forward. It's very clear. It gets primarily one use for one slow pitch tournament in September that accumulates most of the revenue, and a bigger discussion is needed. But at this time, I'll move a motion then that this gets removed from the 2020 budget.
Okay, I'm going to go to Travis.
Can I just ask for clarification? Are you moving option 2 then to remove the backstops and go ahead with, or are you just putting this into stasis for the time being until Parks Committee has a chance to look at it? I just want to be clear on what the motion intends.
I think we do need to have the committee take a further look at it. If option 2 is the best, yeah, I mean, that's, if there's a safety issue there, we have to rectify the safety issue. But rectifying it for $7,500 for 306 or one weekend of slow pitch doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Your Worship. Currently, right now, we do have 4. There's one that was used like T-ball or something like that, and then we have the 3 in each corner. Which were, if we went with option 1, which were the 2 that were going to remain as functional diamonds?
So the little T-ball one would come out. We would keep northwest and southwest, and that, I'll call it northeast, would come out as well.
Okay, and do we still do the cricket pitch or something that we did there back in 10 years ago?
No.
No? Okay. I was going to make a joke that Councillor was going to be pushing option 2, but I wasn't really sure you were going to do it, but another story.
Lunch story. Brian, go ahead.
I think this is a bigger conversation. I don't think I'm not going to support the motion because I don't think taking that $7,500 out is going to fix it. But we need to have a bigger discussion on, Councillor Gray, you talked at council the other night about St. Julian's Park and putting housing around there, and you've got a city bus going right there. I thought that was the best idea ever. And it just gets my wheels spinning because all we do, I think if you asked Adam, all we do at St. Julian's Park is cut grass. So why don't we save that money and do something with these parks that we do not use? You know, we could still end up with a small park, but I just think it's a bigger conversation. So I'm not looking to get rid of the $7,500 right now, but we need to really have a serious, maybe another tour of the parks and sit down and say, what are we doing with all these parks? And if we make money, if there's parks that we can sell and take that money and put it into the things like this to make the parks that we do use more efficient or better off, then maybe, but we have to have that bigger conversation.
Anyone else wish to speak to it? Looks like we're down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It looks like we're down to an even number without the mayor voting in with me. Then that changes the right. So I may be called to play in this, so I might as well speak to it. I won't vote to take it out, but I'd like to look at potential alternatives too. So if it ends up that I'm breaking a tie, then I will be voting against removing this for now. But I'd still like to have the conversation going forward. Richard?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I'm not going to support the motion, but I would certainly support a subsequent motion to send this back to the Community Services Committee for a further recommendation to come back to council on what to do with that.
If I could, Your Worship, the process to repurpose or divest part or all of a park is laid out in that master plan. So on Monday night, you did give direction that we look at that for a portion of Stony Orchard, Timber MacArthur Park at 23rd Street East. So that experience, working through that process, may really help you kind of get a feel for, you know, how this might work and how it looks and how the community feels about this. But we can certainly send it back to Community Services.
Just with your comments, just to clarify what I meant, I don't mean, for me, I don't necessarily mean changing the park over. That's others' discussions. I was just thinking about temporary alternatives for the fencing, if some kind of netting or something, if you're only using a weekend a year, is sort of the alternatives that I was thinking of, just to be clear. Go ahead, Brock.
Yeah, just so we're clear, like, the existing backstop is dangerous, right? Yeah.
I asked Adam if we could sort of limp through another year doing some repairs. I think if we decommission those, the northeast and the small park, we're not impacting anything that you rent. We could, you know, through Community Services Committee, we can see if there's a cheaper alternative, partial repair that sort of buys us some time.
Okay, so do you want to go ahead?
I would just like the motion repeated, so there's been a lot of discussion.
That's what it's going to do. All the pressure's on you.
I just had that we're removing 20D 51 Harrison Field backstops replacement.
So it was just, the motion is just to remove this, so I'll call the question. All in favor?
Not remove, like you just said replacement, but it was, option 2 is remove the backstops. So removing the safety hazard.
Okay, so what is your motion?
Well, as was presented in the report, it would be option 2, remove the backstops, repurpose serviceable features to other parks, and consider alternative use of the park for the surrounding neighborhood. But not just to leave the backstops all as status quo with no repair.
Go ahead, Travis.
So option 2 would be to decommission all fields. Is that correct?
That's my understanding of
So so if we go forward with option 2, yes, we'll remove the $7,500 because we'll be doing no repairs, but we're also going to decommission all current 4 fields and go to a... Okay, no.
That's the way I interpreted it.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we're clear on that. So I'll call the question. All in favor of that motion? 1 opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's defeated, and I didn't have to break a tie. Pam, I'm just thinking it's about 12:20. Oh, yeah, maybe we'll deal with the subsequent motion first.
Do we need to choose one of these options as a part of this process? That's what the first question.
I don't think so. If you want to send it back to Community Services Committee for further analysis and evaluation and options, that would be option 3.
So then with the item still in the budget, I would move that we send the item back to Community Services for a further recommendation to come forward to council at a later date. So the money is still there as a placeholder, but we'll have another chance to determine which direction to go with the park.
Okay, all in favor? And that is carried. Now, Pam, it's 12:25, thinking this is a perfect time to stop. Apparently food's been here for 20 minutes, 10 minutes. How much time do we need? Half an hour?